Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the cosy little cafe was bursting with activity, which was relatively normal for the lunch hour rush. The bustling, busy waitresses, clad in black with white aprons around their middles, were run off their feet, taking orders from hungry, demanding customers. You could hear the background sounds of men and women talking garrulously, in high and low voice tones, along with the clanging of cutlery, plates, and the tinkling of glasses. It was a quaint little cafe in Portland, highly esteemed and renowned for their legendary light snacks. The pièce de résistance being the most extraordinary, unsurpassed toasted cheese that would arrive on a plate, puffy, crisp and light, filled with sauté onions, crispy bacon, and a faint taste of beer on the tongue. It was the most sought-after illustrious snack at the cafe, which meant many of the locals called the cafe the Toasted Cheese Place. Everyone knew exactly what you were talking about when you referred to it like that. Claudia was wiping her hands against the white apron wrapped around her black jeans. She was feeling more than a little flustered, really rather frustrated, as nothing was more infuriating than customers willfully keeping you waiting. She had been making repetitive trips to table number 5, raising her voice as loudly as she could, several times to take their orders, but they had barely noticed her presence, as they were so entwined and keenly engrossed in conversation. She decided to try again, taking a deep breath, bracing herself to being rejected yet again. Excuse me, are you ready to order?" she asked, raising her voice, but once again she was met with a wall of silence, as the 4 customers were talking with a sedulous earnestness, failing abysmally at even noticing her presence at the table. Claudia decided they were definitely siblings, or at the very least related. They all possessed exactly the same olive green eyes, thick dark eyelashes, long Irish faces that reminded her of Sigourney Weaver's look in her younger days. One of the girls' hair was dyed a bright green colour, swept away from her face, tied in the back in a tight little knot that looked really rather fetching. "Excuse me," she asked again, "are you ready to order?" But once again no one responded to her desperate pleas for attention. "But I don't understand. What could have happened to her?" said the young man, whom Claudia decided was particularly handsome, with his honey-coloured skin, curly locks of dark brown hair, which gave him a rather angelic look, she thought. "You don't understand," said the girl with the green hair. "Come on, Oliver. Isn't it obvious? Dad finally went too far this time. His temper got out of hand. He lashed out, and then—" "Then what?" "Well, he did her in. Not on purpose, of course." The other young man intervened in the conversation. "Jane, are you completely nuts? Dad might be many things, but he's not a murderer." "Then explain why Mum has been missing for 3 days, and Dad doesn't seem at all concerned." "Because that's Dad for you," said the young man. "You know what he's like. He never worries about a single thing. He never ever has. If Mum goes away for a few days, he doesn't bat an eyelid. He's always been insouciant and carefree like that. I say we call the police, said the other woman. I think we should file a missing persons report as soon as possible. At that, the girl with the green hair flared up, rather like a protective dog, ready to lash out at her sister. She almost growled in her disapproval. Involve the police? Are you stark raving mad, Jennifer? We don't need them sniffing around the place like a bad smell. Just supposing. And listen, I'm saying supposing, so don't blow my head off again when I say this. You know what Dad's like. I know he's a lovable teddy bear most of the time, but let's not kid. When he gets a little heated under the collar, he can blow a fuse. So heaven help you if you get caught up in the firing line. Just imagine if he accidentally lashed out at Mum. Maybe he pushed her down the stairs. Dad is a bull in a china shop sometimes, rarely cloddish, clumsy, ungainly. You think Dad has killed her, don't you, Jane? Said the young man called Oliver. You think he's only gone and buried her under the patio or in the backyard or something? Well, it's a distinct possibility. For a while everybody was silent, as if they were processing the ominous, baleful, inauspicious words that no one wanted to be thinking. For the 4 kids, the very thought that their father could have killed their mother in a heated moment sent shivers of impending dread down their spines, leaving all 4 siblings shuddering in dismay, barely able to conceal their rising level of angst, as all 3 green eyes glinted with a worry that was easily discerned by Claudia. This was the perfect, quintessential time for her to take down the order, but she was so entranced and engaged in the conversation that she continued to listen, as no one had noticed her standing there eavesdropping on what was to date the most interesting, intriguing conversation she'd ever heard since she'd started working at the cafe. Well then, what do we do about this? Said Oliver, his furrow crinkling in hundreds of worry lines. Supposing Jane is right, and Dad has accidentally killed Mummy. We need to protect him. We can't let the police know about this under any circumstances. Let's not kid. They wouldn't see this as an accident. They'd lock him up and throw away the key. He could be in prison for life. That would destroy him. It would break Mum's heart if that were to happen to him. Why are we all assuming and audaciously presupposing that Dad has fortuitously killed Mum? Said the other girl with the long brown hair that cascaded beyond her shoulders in a glorious fountain of gleaming locks. It's so typical of you, Jane, to be so melodramatic, to immediately unabashedly launch into worst-case scenario without giving poor Dad the benefit of the doubt. Mum could be a legitimate missing person. I mean, hundreds of people go missing every year here in America. It's an established fact. Everybody knows this. Well, more to the point, said Oliver. You spoke to Dad, Jane. What did he have to say to you? Well, you know what Dad's like. He was nonchalant, dispassionate, as cool as a cucumber. He said that Mum had been gone for 3 days, that maybe she'd simply hired an Uber, visited her sister Ruth. But I phoned Ruth. Ruth told me that Mum hadn't visited her. So then where is she? That's the $101 question. Well, it's a pity Mum doesn't drive, said Oliver. At least we would be able to discern by her car whether she was still on the farm or whether she went somewhere and never returned. Jane looked up to see Claudia standing there with her pen and paper. Let's order, everyone. We're keeping this poor waitress waiting. I think we'll have 4 of your toasted cheese and 4 Mountain Dews, she said to the waitress. Is everybody happy with that? Her sisters and brothers nodded. Claudia then nodded, scurrying away, wishing she hadn't been spotted standing there, as she had thoroughly enjoyed listening in to the conversation. She was wondering what could have possibly happened to their mother. Was it really possible that the father had accidentally killed her, panicked and buried her under the patio or in the backyard? You heard of things all the time like that. Even the stats revealed that you had more chance of being killed by someone close to you, a family member even, rather than by a random stranger. She could discern the siblings absolutely adored their father, but his blasé, apathetic and indifferent attitude over his missing wife surely was a red flag to them, she thought. But then what did she know about murder? Claudia quickly returned to the table with steaming hot plates of puffy melt-in-the-mouth toasted cheese, garnished with sprigs of parsley and a side salad, along with frosted glasses of Mountain Dew. Jane, I think you need to go and speak to Dad. Find out what's going on. You've always been more forthright than the rest of us, but keep us posted as to what is going on, said Oliver. Will do so, said Jane, thanking Claudia for the toasted cheese. These look scrummy, she said. Oh, our toasted cheese is very famous here, said Claudia, smiling. Please all enjoy. Jane's account. Jane sat in her truck, feeling so frustrated. She pulled back her green hair, undoing the knot and refastening it again. Something she always did when she was nervous or rather on edge. Some might reach for a cigarette to calm their frazzled nerves. Jane tended to play with her hair. As odd as it sounds for her, twiddling her hair around in her fingertips rarely did relax her significantly. She had organised the meeting at the cafe in Portland to discuss the plight of her mother, but it hadn't gone down very well with her siblings as she had hoped. Of course, everyone thought she was being scandalous, going beyond the pale, discussing the high probability of her mother being accidentally killed by her father. Everyone thought she was blowing things way out of proportion. But then where was her mother? People didn't randomly disappear for 3 days at a time without getting in touch, did they? Jane's father was the most wonderful man, but he was tall, ponderous, and rather heavy-handed in his body, a little like the Incredible Hulk, as he was well over 6 foot tall, very stockily built. It was almost as if he had never fully grown into his body, and was oblivious to how his ungraceful great size could cause a great deal of damage if he wasn't very careful. Indeed, her maladroit father had been known to ungainly walk into tables, breaking glass vases, ornaments, window panes, and glass tabletops without much difficulty at all. He was the kind of mellow, chilled, affable man that was so easygoing and relaxed he wouldn't bat an eyelid if you didn't return home for a couple of days. Growing up, her mother had found her husband's nonchalant, warm-hearted approach to child-rearing completely infuriating at times. She did not know a husband like him, who didn't worry at all about his kids. Why was he so unfazed about the kids when they didn't return home from a party in Portland? She'd be the one frantically worrying, while her husband would always look at her with a perturbed expression on his face and say, "Why are you worrying about something you can't control?" He was the one who thought his wife's behaviour was irrational, not the other way round. He would argue that people were responsible for themselves. Worrying about their whereabouts was a complete waste of time and energy. It probably explained why her father had normal blood pressure, not a single grey hair on his head, and a forehead completely devoid of worry lines, while her mother had a full head of grey curls. It was clear that in their relationship she was the one that did the worrying for the both of them. There was one contentious issue as far as Jane was concerned in regards to her father, and that was when he lost his temper, which was thankfully a rare occurrence, as it scarcely ever happened. For indeed it was true that the unruffled, placid Lawrence barely ever got mad. But should he get provoked for some reason, he could seriously overreact. His huge, uncoordinated hands would go swinging around the place like an octopus, oscillating his tentacles. But the problem was that Lawrence was not malleable, elastic, flexible, or pliable like an octopus. So if he thrashed out at you with his powerful fists in an irked frenzy, accidents were more than likely to happen. So heaven help you if you got caught up in the crossfire. On 2 occasions he'd lashed out at the wall, but inadvertently hit his wife fallaciously, causing her to fall quite badly. He hadn't intended to even touch her. "Lawrence, why do you have to be a bull in a china shop all the time, when your feathers get ruffled?" his wife had complained bitterly. "Is there no way you can stop throwing your arms around the place? You're like one of those humongous, frenzied, lovable dogs that impetuously knocks everything over in his path, causing a tsunami of devastation in its wake. You seem to fail to see how big and cumbersome you are. You break everything you touch, but things are replaceable. But I'd like to tell you, Lawrence, your children and wife are not. So if you break us, you can't just go and buy new models of us." As Jane sat back in her gleaming white BMW, she imagined whether her father might have killed her mother inadvertently. I mean, these things happened. There was no point in beating around the bush, talking in circles like her siblings always did. You never got anywhere with that approach. No, she needed to be direct with her father, to the point of being candidly blunt and brusque. She'd say it as it is in a forthright, undiplomatic way. "Dad, did you kill Mum unwittingly? I know you wouldn't have done it intentionally, but please tell me exactly what happened." Of course, her siblings would be appalled with her being so forthright, but as usual, her father was so perfunctory and lackadaisical about his beloved wife being missing for a couple of days. In his mind, his wife had gone off to visit her sister, but Jane knew very well her mother never just disappeared without telling anyone where she was going. She wasn't like that at all. Jane put down her foot on the accelerator, making sure to keep her driving at a safe speed. She drove to the family lavender farm, which was about 4.5 hours from Portland, not too far from the town of Jacksonville in Oregon. Before long she was driving down the country roads, familiar stretches of land that brought warm, wistful feelings of nostalgia back into her heart. Sentimental, evocative feelings of her blessed childhood, as this was the part of the world where she'd grown up as a young girl. She drove past pretty barns, fields of black and white dappled cows grazing happily in the pastures. Then she finally was driving on the dusty dirt road that led to her father's lavender farm, where the family distilled lavender essential oil for a living. She felt heartily annoyed that the road had not been paved with asphalt, as it was as dusty as it ever had been, so her rubber wheels were lifting up smoky mists of dust. Finally she reached the wooden farm gate, posted Lavender Hills Farm. She drove down the long asphalt drive, her nose hit by the rich fragrant smell of lavender that she adored so much. She emphatically believed that one of the quintessential reasons for her vibrant health was having been surrounded by the fields of lavender every day of her young life. Some people joked that the lavender oil was the very reason their father Lawrence was always so relaxed and perpetually wore a broad grin on his face, as lavender is known as a powerful sedative with mood-enhancing benefits. Ostensibly, sleeping in the Collandier household had never ever been a stumbling block, as the entire family literally slept like babies. But Jane had almost certainly noticed that when she was away from home she suffered from insomnia, so she was certain the air filled with the fragrant bouquet of lavender had always ensured her an excellent, undisturbed, peaceful night's sleep. The farm looked absolutely radiant as usual, as if it was smiling at her, welcoming her back home. The most beguiling fields of purple stretched out over vast squares of land, the soft shafts of sunlight bespeckling the valley in a pretty luminescence of an arresting new day, while the tall trees that framed the boundaries of the lavender fields in rich shades of viridescent greens complemented the vibrant purple colour most favourably. Those majestic trees she loved so much sprawled out generously into a vast sumptuous wood grove with statuesque trees that rose up into the sky like imposing giants that were so impressive to behold. Jane sighed with delight. Slamming the door behind her, she was greeted to a sea of wagging tails, excited barks, but the dogs had been well trained not to jump up on people, which she was relieved about, considering she was wearing a white dress. She could see her father walking down the step towards her with a broad, cheeky grin on his face. "This is a lovely surprise, Jane," he said, wrapping his arms around her in a warm, affectionate hug. "What brings you home to the farm?" "I'm worried about Mum. I've heard she's gone missing for 2 to 3 days. "Oh, that," said her father, giving her a grin. "I spoke to you about that already. You worry far too much. You know your mother, Jane. She's so impulsive. My guess is she's gone to visit her sister Ruth." "Dad, I'm being deadly serious now," said Jane, growing visibly annoyed. "This is your wife we're talking about, my mother. For your information, Ruth has not seen Mum recently. So the big question is, where is she?" At that, her father raised a brow. "Funny. You do surprise me. I thought that she might be at Ruth's. I wonder where she's got to." "Dad, you haven't done anything to her, have you?" she asked him gingerly. "I'm sorry to have to ask, but I need to know." "What are you implying, Jane?" said her father, growing indignant and chagrined. "You think I've bumped your mother off, is that it? Buried her here in the yard? Is that what you kids really think about me?" "Well, Dad, I just want you to know that whatever has happened, we are 100% behind you. All of us are. You know we are. We understand that accidents happen. And let's just say this without putting too fine a point on it, Dad, but you are a tad clumsy, always bumping into things." "Well, that's very nice to know, dear, that you have my back," said her father sarcastically. "Dad, you know what you're like. I keep saying you're big and clumsy. When you get angry, you start boxing the walls. Sometimes you're so cumbersome you end up hurting anyone in the crossfire. You could have accidentally killed Mum, panicked, and buried her." Jane's father studied his earnest daughter in horror through his olive green eyes, framed by thick dark lashes that only served to accentuate the depth of their greenness. He hardly dared to believe what his daughter was implying. Did his kids really believe he was capable of killing their mother, the quintessential love of his life, the woman who made his life richer and more beautiful by her mere presence? Just because he wasn't concerned about his wife's whereabouts at the minute, his kids now suspected him of foul play. If Jane thought he was guilty of this duplicity, then he assumed so did all his other children. It mortified him to think that they could even conceive that he of all people could have done away with his wife. The mere thought was nonsensical. It should be a source of great offence that his kids would have such a low opinion of him, he thought. "Jane, I can't believe you would even suggest—" "But Dad, we know what you are like. All of us do. But the police don't. Imagine if you were to report Mum missing now. They'd think that you had something to do with her disappearance. You'd become their prime suspect." "Why are you overreacting, Jane? Your mum's only been gone for 2 or 3 days. Maybe she wanted a break. Maybe she's booked into a cottage by the coast. I wouldn't begrudge her doing something like that. I am Eleanor's husband. I'm not her keeper." "So she's just bogged off to the coast, has she, Dad? Without telling you? That's a crazy idea. You know it is. You know that's not like her." "Your mother doesn't have to tell me everything she does." "Oh, Dad, you're so exasperating. You never worry about anyone. But you should be worried about Mum. Supposing something terrible happened to her. Imagine if she had a catastrophic accident." Lawrence tried to digest everything his daughter was saying. He'd always emphatically believed his family overreacted over the most insignificant things. In his humble opinion, this situation was no different. If his wife had taken off 3 days, that was her business. But why were his kids making a song and dance about it? He was absolutely certain his wife would return home safe and well, as she always did. He'd never worried about things like this in his life. But his daughter suggesting his wife could have been involved in an accident suddenly made him feel quite queasy. He'd never entertained such unsettling, discomposing thoughts before. But now, for the first time in his long life, he was beginning to feel unhinged. "Dad, where did you see Mum last? I want you to think very carefully about this." "I think she mentioned she was going for a walk in the wood grove." "Well, we need to go and find her." Lawrence needed little encouragement now. Suddenly his apathetic attitude was overtaken with a grievous concern. Imagine if Jane was right. Imagine if his wife really was in trouble. Eleanor's account. "I'm going for a walk, darling," she said, blowing Lawrence a big kiss. "I need some fresh air. Actually, I'm gagging for it. I felt cooped up indoors after all that torrential rain we've had recently." "What are you telling me for, sweetheart? You know you can do what you want around here. We never stand on ceremony. You're as free as a bird. Since when have I ever clipped your wings?" "Since never," said Eleanor, "although it would be good if you were worried about me a teensy-weensy bit," she teased. "Worry about you?" laughed Lawrence. "Why would I worry about you, dear? You're perfectly capable of looking after yourself. I never have to worry about you." Eleanor smiled as she walked through one of the fields of lavender towards the wood grove. One thing about growing lavender for a living was that she was always in a good mood. When she had married Lawrence all those years ago, her health had radically improved exponentially, which she put down to the healing powers of the essential oil that infused the air that she breathed every day of her life. Eleanor never failed to stop marvelling at the oceans of lavender, flowers that stretched out before her in resplendent carpets of purple. There were bees buzzing around the plants, colourful butterflies darting from one flower to another. She breathed in the heady, full-bodied, provocative fragrance, delighting in the rich, intoxicating, potent smell. Who would have thought she'd have ended up marrying a lavender farmer, she thought to herself. Lawrence was the perfect husband. He'd never worried about a thing. while Eleanor had come from a background in which her parents were always frantically worried about absolutely everything. If she had been 5 minutes late as a little girl for anything, her parents would have panic attacks, thinking that she'd been caught up in a deadly accident or something quite catastrophic had happened to her. It was hardly a wonder, she thought, that by the time both of her parents were in their 30s, their hair had turned as white as snow. By the time they'd both reached their 50s, they'd both died of sudden unforeseen heart attacks. Eleanor knew in her gut that the root cause of their sudden fortuitous demise was their incessant worry and stress about absolutely everything you can think of. She emphatically believed that she and her 2 younger siblings, Mark and Alexia, had caused her parents so much stress growing up, resulting in them both having soaring high blood pressure, high cholesterol and diabetes. The doctor had informed her mother Elaine that if she didn't calm down and learn to relax, she would invariably end up having a heart attack, and lo and behold, that is exactly what had transpired. When Eleanor had met Lawrence for the very first time, she had been attracted and charmed by the very tall, ungainly man, who didn't seem capable of worrying about a single thing. She found his carefree attitude to life, his inability to get stressed about anything, so refreshing, intriguing, and somewhat bewitching. He had been good for Eleanor, for she knew that Lawrence's calm demeanour had rubbed off on her over the years, significantly calming her down. She was ever grateful that if she got in her truck and went away for a couple of days without even informing her husband, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid or worry about her at all. He would know that she was perfectly all right, although there was a small part of her that wished he'd worry just a little bit. Supposing one time she really was in trouble, she pondered, and Lawrence had no comprehension that she needed his help. Some people would misconstrue her husband's indifference to her whereabouts as a husband who did not love his wife, but nothing could be further from the truth, for she knew no one could love her as much as Lawrence did, and as far as she was concerned, he was the love of her life. Eleanor made her way into the wood grove beyond being in the field of lavender. This was the most treasured place in the world to her. As a girl growing up, one of her most cherished, beloved stories was The Secret Garden, where 3 children discovered the delights of a magical garden hidden away from prying eyes. For Eleanor, the wood grove represented just that. To her it was a secret little favoured sanctuary, her special place. Over the years since her children had left home and were now working in Portland, the wood grove had become her most favourite little hideaway. She wasn't sure what it was that she loved about this tranquil, serene haven. She adored the remarkably stately-looking trees that were so old, so regal, so mature. They seemed like wizened friends who had been around for an awfully long time, even before she was born, which was a sobering, rather humbling thought. She delighted in the majesty, splendour, graceful repose of all the trees, the vast knowledge and sagacious wisdom she believed their long, rugged, rough-textured trunks contained. She delighted in their boughs full of glistening leaves. If that wasn't enough eye candy for you, she adored the soft earthen floor, along with the beguiling plants that grew beneath the trees, the feathery ferns with their lacy leaves, the different distinguished unique ground covers, the edible funguses, the rich verdant mosses that swathed the forest floor in glorious carpets of viridescent green. It was so magical the way the prisms of sunlight danced so daintily through the branches, dappling the forest floor in an ethereal, sparkling luminescence. As Eleanor walked into the wood grove, she smelt the pungent stench of cigarette smoke on the wind, which was strange, as no one should be in this wood grove. It was private land, property owned by her family. Her hackles immediately rose. Then she saw him, a bedraggled, sorry sight of a man, who in one gnarled, arthritic-looking hand held a cigarette he was clearly smoking. In the other, a half-empty bottle of rum he was drinking. She noticed to her disgust there were several bottles of rum and whiskey strewn haphazardly across the ground, all empty. Eleanor marched towards the man indignantly. He looked to be in his early 60s, with a wrinkled, weathered face that had been overexposed to the sun, a scattering of silvery grey hair that was brushed over a rather bald scalp, as if to cover it. He was wearing shabby, soiled clothes that looked like he hadn't changed over many weeks. A vagrant, she thought to herself, and not a pleasant one at that. She felt angry about the stranger's brazen audacity. Who was he? What was he doing on her land like this? As she moved towards him, she was hit by the violent stench of human body odour, urine, and clothes that stank of cigarettes. She noticed he had rigged up a pop-up tent in the woods. How dare he be so brazenly presumptuous, she thought. Who the hell did he think he was? "Excuse me," she said, putting her hands on her hips in defiance. "This is private property. What are you doing on my land? You need to leave now. You need to leave at once." The man was clearly inebriated. She could see his legs were unsteady, wobbling beneath him. He began to chuckle as he smoked, occasionally taking a gulp of his rum. "You're telling me to go, lady? I'm not going anywhere. You can't tell me what to do." "I can tell you to leave my property right now." The man began to chuckle, as if he found Eleanor's protests highly amusing. "You're a feisty thing, aren't you?" he teased. "I bet you're good in the sack." "How dare you speak to me like that?" Eleanor began to raise her voice. "You get off my property right now. Do you understand that? You get off my property now. Leave now." The man's tone began to change. As his humour disengaged, he recruited anger towards Eleanor that caught her distinctly off guard. No one tells me what to do. No one. You bloody bitch. You bloody bitch. I know what you're like. You women, you're all the same. All the same. You think you can boss me around? Is that it? You get the F out of here. You think you can tell me what to do? The next thing that Eleanor knew was the man picked up a stone and threw it at her head. She recalls falling back on the ground. Everything went completely black. How long was Eleanor unconscious? She didn't know, but she woke up to find herself in a cave, where prisms of sunlight danced through the cracks of the stone, enabling her to see clearly, even though the light was faint, but it danced around the cave in soft shadows. She noticed the stone walls of the cave were tall as they were wide. "Where am I?" she thought, sitting up in surprise, looking down on herself to discover that she was laying on a straw and bracken bed that was covered in deer pelts. It was dark and cool in the cave, the floor carpeted also with deer pelts. Dried lavender hung on the walls of the cave, which made the place smell quite fragrant. It was certainly a cosy-looking den. She looked around, thinking to herself, "Where the heck am I?" Her head was throbbing violently. She touched the sensitive sore spot on her head, where it really hurt. She could feel a large swollen bump that was tender to the touch. She could see that the skin had been grazed, as if she must have been bleeding there, but it had obviously dried up. Then a memory came flashing back to her. Of course, that obnoxious drunk in the woodgrove. He'd thrown a rock at her. But how had she ended up here? Where was she? That was when she saw a dark shadow moving towards her. To her amazement, she found herself locking eyes with a female Bigfoot. Until this point in time, she had never believed in the existence of such a mythical creature. But now she was in no doubt that Bigfoot was real, unless the blow to her head had been so hard that she was now hallucinating. The creature looked directly at her, through the kindest eyes Eleanor had ever beheld, then pointed to her head and said some strange words that Eleanor discerned was very much a language. Eleanor nodded. She said, "Yes, I do remember. I got hit." The creature nodded, as if to affirm what Eleanor was saying. She noticed that it seemed to have the ability to read her mind. The creature was different to what she would have anticipated a Bigfoot to look like. She had been under the distinct impression that they bore a remarkable resemblance to an ape. But this she did not think was the case. In her humble opinion, the creature looked like a giant human being, covered in long dark hair, the colour of coal, with overlong arms and a distinctive pyramid-shaped head. At a guess, the creature was easily over 8 foot tall, about 700 pounds, and was distinctly female, as she had rather drooping breasts that hung low upon her chest. The Bigfoot disappeared for a moment, returning with berries and a few apples. Eleanor was grateful, not being able to comprehend why she was so hungry. The creature, having read her thoughts, lifted up her fingers, pointing to her, raising 3 fingers, as if to say, "You've been out for 3 days." "You mean I've been here for 3 days?" gasped Eleanor. The creature nodded. Eleanor was absolutely shocked. She thought about Lawrence and smiled to herself. Thank God he wouldn't be worrying about her, she thought. She ate the apple and berries hungrily. Then she got to her feet, wobbling unsteadily, as her head was still throbbing. She moved towards the door of the cave, gasping when she realized how high the cave was off the ground. There was no way she could walk down this precipitous rocky outcrop without breaking her neck, she thought. You'd have to be as agile as a mountain goat to maneuver your body down this mountainous incline. The Bigfoot indicated that she would carry Eleanor, and she agreed to this. There was no way she could navigate her way down this outcrop. Besides, she didn't know where she was, as the terrain was unfamiliar to her. The very congenial, benevolent Bigfoot picked her up in her arms as if she was as light as a feather, and then bounded out of the cave, down the rocky incline, with efficiency and grace. Eleanor sniffed the Bigfoot. She had heard stories that they stank, but this wasn't true. She liked the smell of the female Bigfoot. She smelt of the earth and of lavender. Eleanor pressed her head against the soft hair and felt a warmth in her heart, as if she was swaddled and protected by the creature's love. She could feel the rise and fall of the Bigfoot's chest and hear the breathing sounds from her nose that rather reminded her of a horse. The Bigfoot glided gracefully with Eleanor in her arms to the wood grove that Eleanor loved and adored so much. She could hear the sounds of her daughter's voice calling her, so she indicated for the Bigfoot to put her down on the ground. Then she wrapped her arms lovingly around the creature, giving her a big warm hug. Thank you, she said. "I can't thank you enough for helping me." For a second the two of them locked eyes. Eleanor saw that the Bigfoot seemed to be smiling at her. It then nodded. She watched it gliding away. What a magnificent creature, she thought. "I'm here, Jane," she cried out. Jane came running through the forest, racing towards her mother, enveloping her mother in her arms. "Mum, I thought you were dead," she cried with relief. Lawrence was smiling. "So there you are, my sweet darling," he said. "The kids thought I'd done you in, buried you under the patio." At that Eleanor burst out laughing. "As if your father would do that to me. Really, Jane?" "Well, he is very clumsy," said Jane. "He is that," her mother agreed. "And he never worries if you go missing, not even for a couple of days. That's not normal." "True," said her mother, "but I wouldn't have your father any other way." Jane pulled her cell phone from her pocket and sent an SMS to all her siblings. "Mum is safe and well." "Where have you been, Mum?" said Jane. "Wouldn't you like to know?" said her mother. "Let's just say if I told you my story, you'd be unlikely to believe a word of it." To this day, Eleanor does not know who the mystery man was that was dossing down in the wood grove, but she is ever grateful to a Bigfoot that rescued her in her impaired state, nursing her back to health. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the green Fiat's engine takes great strain as it trundles rather awkwardly up the hill, with such a steep incline that it would seem that this road is clearly not designed for anything less than a four-wheel drive. Anna eagerly winds down the driver's side window to remove the stuffy, claustrophobic, oxygen-deprived air from the long drawn-out drive here to the Oregon coast. The Fiat's unglamorous interiors are harbouring the leftover residual smells of the fatty hamburgers and chips they had acquired at a fast food outlet along the way, that had made Anna feel nauseously sick for most of the journey here. It would seem her body had not appreciated this huge ingestion of fat. Anna gladly welcomes the surge of fresh, cooling breeze that enters the car, smelling strongly of salt and seaweed. The breeze magnanimously steals away the rancid smells of the less than palatable lunch that the family had ingested ravenously while on the move. It would seem even the chips had been steeped in fat. They were barely palatable.
It's amazing what you will eat when you're ravenously hungry. Howie, her son, sitting on the back seat of the car, is all but wearing a flimsy white polo shirt, along with a pair of olive green khaki shorts. He's not amused by this rude intrusion of ice-cold air. He could well do without. "It's freezing, Mum! Please close the window, will you?" Anna glances at her son in her visor mirror and apologetically winds up the window. "So sorry, love. It really stinks in here. I wanted to get rid of that fatty smell from the lunch we had. I forgot you recently recovered from a cold. You look awfully pale. Are you all right?" "Stop fussing, Mum, will you? I'm fine," snapped little Howie, sounding a little bristly. "Don't treat me like I'm a baby. I'm 10 years old, and besides, my cold was over 2 weeks ago, or have you already forgotten that?" Anna could not blame her feisty 10-year-old son for being rather abrasive and tetchy in the circumstances. It had been a long, insufferable road trip, and for an active little boy like Howie, the journey had been close to unbearable. She sneakily suspected he'd lightly felt like a bird tethered to its cage that was longing to escape and to fly to freedom. To give Howie his due, he had been relatively restrained and reasonably well behaved during the course of this 2-day journey, not complaining even once, which was a turn-up for the books. Howie was a demonstrative child, not afraid to vent if he got upset. She could tell by the way he was restlessly moving around on the back seat like a trapped, flustered pigeon that this road trip had worn him to a frazzle, and he'd had enough. Her little boy was itching to get out of the stuffy car. She couldn't blame him for that. She felt exactly the same way. Her lower back had begun to ache from awkwardly sitting in the same position for far too long. Throughout her life she'd never been plagued by backache before, so this was a whole new experience for her, and gave her a brief insight into the suffering her husband Douglas had gone through over the years, where he'd been tormented since he was a little boy, with inexplicable pain in his back. The doctors had failed to make a successful diagnosis, when all the tests he'd received over the years in regards to the enigmatic source of his pain were inconclusive, and her husband was told that there was no rhyme or reason he should have pain at all. These days her husband seemed to be managing the problem, for he never complained about backache much, but Anna wondered if he suffered in silence, and hoped that that was not the case. It would seem that her husband Douglas had slept most of the way on the journey, as he was still not in a position to drive for another 6 months or so. Anna would gladly have liked to have shared the driving responsibilities with him on this fortuitous road trip, but it was not to be. So she had been forced to drive for 29 hours, with only one overnight stop on the way, peppered by a few bathroom breaks. It didn't help that Howie was not happy about leaving his school friends so abruptly, to begin a brand new life somewhere completely new, without even having said goodbye to any of them. But that just couldn't be helped. What was the rush anyway, he'd wondered. Why did his parents suddenly seem ever so eager to make this last-minute move to the Oregon coast? Anna glanced back again at Howie through the visor mirror, catching his eye for a brief second, throwing him a warm smile. She was privately wishing she could have a penny for his thoughts. What was he making of all of this, she wondered. It had come as quite the shock to him that they were packing up and leaving her parents' house in northeast Chicago, a green leafy neighborhood called Glencoe, surrounded by an abundance of parks, where they'd been living for the last year or so, after her husband Douglas was unable to work due to the extensive, time-consuming physical therapy he had required in order to regain his mobility. She had assured herself that kids are adaptable, infinitely more resilient than most adults are. She was in absolutely no doubt that little Howie would soon warm up to his brand new life and adjust to the changes in their living arrangements. Kids were very good at that sort of thing, so much better than adults were in that regard. She wasn't as confident that she would be as flexible as her son, as the nauseating idea of moving so far away from close friends and beloved family members had irked her greatly. But you did what you had to do in the circumstances. It was called survival.
She still didn't know how she and her husband had broken even financially, emotionally, and even physically, after the chaotic upheaval they had unwillingly endured over the last few somewhat antagonistic months. One thing that Anna had learnt about life is that its rocky path was not always even and smooth. Somewhere along the line, everybody faces some kind of inopportune challenges that they have to overcome. No one is ever guaranteed a free pass. She had no idea what she and her husband Douglas would have done, had her kind parents not intervened so generously on their behalves, giving them a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, extra cash in their pockets to help them out, that Anna had been reluctant to accept. She absolutely loathed and abhorred being a burden to anyone, most especially her loving parents, that although reasonably well off, were certainly not made of money. The insurance company had been redundant from the very beginning, refusing her husband compensation for his accident at work. Why was she not surprised about that? If you could call it that, due to some fine print in the policy, which meant they could conveniently worm their way out of paying, as theoretically her husband's injuries had occurred off the premises on the adjacent road opposite the site, where Douglas had parked his white Hyundai, and furthermore the injury was not sustained from negligence on the construction site itself, but as a result of being inexplicably physically assaulted and brutally attacked by peoples unknown. Ostensibly the life-threatening injuries her husband had sustained happened at a time when he was overseeing the construction of a brand new development of modern flats. Anna had tried to get her husband to tell her exactly what had happened to him on that fateful inauspicious day that had callously, with a cold-hearted insouciance, turned their lives upside down. But to date she remained ignorantly uninformed about any of the significant details concerning what had really happened to her husband, as the whole event was obscured by a cloudy fog of mystery that refused to dissipate. Even Anna's cloak-and-dagger inquiry she had made surreptitiously at the building site had been met with a dead end, and a very unenthusiastic response from the construction workers in hard hats, who shook their heads and said, "I'm sorry. I cannot help you. None of us can. We heard your husband was injured, and yes, we're very sorry about that. It happened where his car was parked on the opposite side of that road over there, when he was leaving the premises. We didn't see a thing." Anna knew they were lying. They were afraid to talk. It would seem her husband's personal assistant on the building site, an aloof man called Andy, was also not forthcoming, and appeared unusually guarded and standoffish. "Let's just say, Mrs. Finnegan, the less you know the better. That's all I can say," he told her gingerly. "If you want my advice, Mrs. Finnegan, if you care about your husband and the safety of your own family, don't go ruffling anyone's feathers by asking too many questions. It could backfire on you. There are people out there that wouldn't be afraid to cause you grievous bodily harm if you wag that tongue of yours too much." "What on earth do you mean, Andy? Please explain yourself," Anna had demanded. "Why are you being so damn evasive? What are you not telling me?" Andy had lock-zipped his lips. He crossed them with his fingers, as if he was afraid to talk. "Like I said, Mrs. Finnegan, I'm saying nothing. Understand?" With that he walked away, kicking the ground furiously with his heavy-weight boots, as if he was pissed about something that he was disinclined to express. Anna found his maddening behaviour profoundly odd. Everyone was acting strangely, and the men wearing their hard yellow hats on the construction site were giving her furtive, rather worried glances, as if they believed she was stirring up trouble for them, and were silently willing her to go away. What the hell was going on here? She wondered, her mind a tumultuous whirl of all kinds of ill-omened scenarios that were being planted in her head suggestively, that did not bear thinking about. Why was no one talking about her husband's assault? It almost looked as if there was some clandestine cover-up going on, and no one was willing to talk to her or tell her anything.
Andy was the one that had called her out on that fateful day to deliver the mortifying news concerning her husband.
Anna, you need to go to the hospital as quickly as possible. Douglas is not going to make it. He's had a dreadful accident on the road adjacent to the building site. You need to prepare yourself for the very worst. It's not looking good.
She could still remember that airy, haunting phone call that every wife would dread receiving from their husband's work. She surmised by the wretched, deflated tone of Andy's voice that there'd be no silver lining to this cloud. With a thundering heart knifing through her chest, with hundreds of cutting blows, in what she would later describe as a bleary daze of confused chaos, a tangle of blistered emotions, Anna had rushed to the hospital, certain that she was on the precipice of losing her husband, and that whatever happened on the road opposite the building site, she concluded that the injuries he'd obviously sustained were clearly not survivable. While driving her green Fiat on the way to the hospital, it had hit her in that poignant moment that in a span of a day that had started off so innocently, she was likely to become a single mother, a widow, and her son Howie would grow up with not much memory of his father. How she succeeded in driving to the hospital that day was nothing short of extraordinary, for she has barely any memory of the experience, as everything had become a smouldering blur. The doctors had given her a bleak prognosis in regards to her husband. She was told that Douglas would not last the night. Douglas's resilience and fortitude had surprised them all. There was so much damage to his body, including bruising on the brain, a ruptured spleen, bruised liver, punctured lung, several broken ribs, a broken leg, dislocated jaw, and the list went on and on. Anna lost track on all the things that were so obviously wrong with her husband. The doctors had described him as beaten up to a pulp, and asked Anna who she thought was responsible for harming him.
Mrs. Finnegan, your husband was not injured on the road opposite the building site in the way you think. This was not accidental, the doctor informed her. Your husband, Mrs. Finnegan, was brutally attacked by people who obviously intended to kill him. I can assure you of this, but whoever these insidious characters were, they underestimated your husband's extraordinary will to survive, which has confounded the all of us here at the hospital. We did not think he would survive, Mrs. Finnegan, let alone last the night. I've been a doctor for 30 long years. I know of no one who's overcome so many injuries. You could determine his survival a miracle. These men who attacked your husband should be locked up in prison, charged with attempted murder. They don't deserve to be walking around breathing the same oxygen as we do. They are the cockroaches of society that don't deserve to be called human.
You say them? Asked Anna, looking nonplussed. You think more than one person did this to my husband, do you?
Yes, Mrs. Finnegan, I do. My guess is your husband was beaten up badly by 2 or 3 men that left him for dead. I know this is brutal to hear, Mrs. Finnegan, but your husband is very lucky to be alive. It'll be a long drawn-out recovery for him, I'm afraid, and he might walk around with a limp for a while, but I'm reasonably confident that in a year's time or so you will have your husband back, and he will be healthy again.
Anna suspected there was more to the story of what had happened to her husband on that fateful day, more than meets the eye. But Douglas could be like a bear with a sore head at times, and when he didn't want to speak about something, wild horses could not drag the truth out of him, no matter how hard you tried. Douglas had lied to the police with a straight, sincere face, saying he couldn't remember what had happened to him. He'd told Anna exactly the same story, but she wasn't buying any of it. She wasn't a complete idiot. She knew her husband Douglas well enough to know when he was pulling a fast one over her. The police believed the bruising on his brain had given him retrograde amnesia. Anna knew there was nothing wrong with her husband's memory, and the so-called retrograde amnesia was a malleable excuse used not to be cooperative with the authorities,
It was awfully convenient. Why was her husband keeping his mouth muzzled about what had actually happened to him? Anna could not comprehend why anybody would wish to harm her husband so brutally. Who in their right mind would want to cause another such vicious, grievous bodily harm? The shock of what had happened to him had ricocheted through her entire family, provoking each member to a great deal of stress. Anna had given up her part-time job in town to care for her husband full-time. She worked in one of Chicago's most exclusive chocolate shops, selling people very select chocolate truffles, all superbly and intricately handcrafted. Douglas had been stuck in a wheelchair for several months. It had been a grueling, taxing, rather frustrating time for the all of them, where tempers had worn thin. Sometimes there had been moments that Anna had wanted to tear her own hair out in frustration, but now the worst of it was behind them, and at long last they had come through the long dark tunnel to the light at the very end. Her husband had been resurrected from his debilitating injuries. He had made a complete recovery. Even the doctors proclaimed they'd never seen such rapid healing before, but believed that Douglas's strong mental will was the reason he'd overcome the adversity so well. It had facilitated his startling quick return to abundant health. Even Anna had to admit he looked as fit as a fiddle today, and was a lot more chirpier than he'd been in quite a while. The police investigation had just drawn blanks. Without any cooperation or willing witnesses on the building site, no one was prepared to admit that they had seen a single thing that day. It meant the flimsy police investigation was a non-starter and had drawn a dead end. Worse still, there was no CCTV footage in the area that could have cast light on what had happened. It was established that Douglas had been badly beaten up when leaving the building site on return to his car. He was pounced on by people with a grievous intent to obviously harm him, for reasons unknown, which is all the police were able to establish. Beyond that, no one was talking. The long-suffering Anna had decided she would be patient with her husband, but in time she would artfully worm the truth out of him, and when she did, she'd go to the police herself and get the very men who were responsible for beating up her husband locked away for good. She could only hope that the hands of karma would deal out to these men the nasty blow they truly deserved for intending to kill her husband. She agreed with Dr. Bronze on the matter. These men were nothing more than cockroaches. People like that were not human at all. She confided in her father about the enigmatic matter, because if anyone could give her great, sagacious, sound advice, it would be him. Over the years she had relied on her father to dig her out of some deep holes, and he had done so with an effortless ease. "Why won't Douglas tell you what happened to him that day, love?" her father had asked her. "What is he hiding?" "I don't know, Dad," she cried out in exasperation, throwing her hands up in the air to express her indignance. "Believe me, I've tried to get him to talk, but you know how doggedly stubborn he can be. But I think he's scared to talk, Dad. That's probably what this is all about." "That's not good, love. If your husband is reluctant to talk, my guess is it is for good reason. These formidable characters who beat him up are obviously dangerous." "There's more, Dad. Stuff I haven't told you," said Anna, becoming teary-eyed. "That sounds ominous, love. You're scaring me. Is it bad?" Anna nodded. "As bad as it can be, Dad. Really, really bad, if you must know." "I'm listening, love," said her father tentatively. "Go on. I'm sure whatever it is, we can find a solution to the problem. You know I will work something out. I always do. Where there's a will, there's a way. Besides, have I ever failed you yet?" Anna drew in a deep breath and spat out the words as if they were as bitter as gall. "Douglas has been getting notes in the post that have been hand-delivered to your house through the letterbox. Whoever sends these notes to him knows that our family has moved in with you and Mother. They know we're living in Glencoe with you, so they're watching us, Dad. That makes me feel very disquieted. Douglas hid these notes from me, you know, but I found them when I was turning over the mattress yesterday morning. I don't think he knows I turn over the mattress every other week or so, as a matter of routine. I guess he didn't want me to see them, and thought the mattress was a good hiding place. It was not, because I found out his little secret, and I wish I hadn't. I take it from what you're saying, love. You've read these so-called letters. Of course I have, Dad. There have been far too many secrets in this household, ever since Douglas's accident, and I want to know what's going on. I know he's been keeping stuff from me, Dad, and sometimes I wish I could shake him so hard to get him to regurgitate the truth, because that infuriating man can be obstinately stubborn, and there's no way he's got retrograde amnesia. No way. I'm not an idiot. You're right, love. Your husband knows exactly what happened to him that day. Maybe he's saying nothing to protect you and little Howie. I'm sure that's the case. I suspect he has very good reasons for pleading amnesia to you and the police. But more to the point, love, what did these letters actually say? Dad, they were threats, said Anna, her alarmed, anxious eyes growing as wide as saucers. In truth, Dad, they scared me to death. Whoever sent them meant business. The writing came from a magazine. The letters were cut out individually and stuck onto a page to form words, if you know what I mean. Anna's father was silent as he digested this sobering information. He looked concerned, with his brow furrowing in a long line of deep railway tracks. That does not sound good, Anna. What did they say, more to the point? Anna shuddered. It's not good, Dad. The note said, We're watching you. If you ever talk, you and your family are dead. One of the notes said, We understand you're feigning amnesia. Keep it that way. You know nothing. Do you understand? You know nothing. Get it? Don't talk or we will finish what we started. You have been warned. You were not supposed to survive your injuries. But second chances only come to those who don't talk. Anna's father let out a long, drawn-out sigh. He tossed his grey hair, shaking his head vigorously, the worry lines on his forehead becoming significantly more pronounced. I don't think I need to tell you, Anna. This is not good, love. You all could potentially be in grave danger. People like this who beat your husband up, who are willing to kill him, and have admitted as much. They are sending him baleful, threatening notes. You don't know what you're dealing with here, love, or even why you're dealing with it in the very first place. I suspect Douglas knows the answers to those questions. My advice is you need to persuade him to leave Chicago, with both you and Howie, as soon as you possibly can. These days your husband's in reasonably good shape. He made a fabulous recovery from his injuries, and is pretty much completely rehabilitated. He's relatively strong now, even though he's still not allowed to drive at the moment, for another 6 months or so. Maybe he could find a job further afield from Chicago. I will help you look online for something suitable. You know the saying, out of sight, out of mind. Hopefully these insidious characters will leave you the hell alone once you've moved out of state. True to his word, her prudent, judicious father, who was one of those people that could manifest a white rabbit out of a magician's black hat, if needs be, set out to fix Anna's problems. Neil Fauntleroy was the most resolutely determined person you could ever hope to meet. The kind of person you'd want with you if you had the grievous misfortune of being stranded on a desert island in the middle of nowhere, far away from human habitation. He would be the one to ingeniously procure the perfect plan to bring you back home safely. Neil Fauntleroy never got himself into a state. He was always level-headed, circumspect, doggedly calm, and unabashedly one of life's fixer-uppers. He seemed to know instinctively what needed to be done in any given situation, and in the past he'd visited war-torn areas across the globe through the British-founded Confederation of Oxfam, which supports 21 independent charitable organisations all over the world. So Neil had been to the scene after major disasters, helping people find food, drinking water and shelter after a major crisis, as Oxfam was renowned for its help with global poverty, and Neil Fauntleroy had been involved in these charitable missions for many years when he was younger, as he seemed to thrive on being able to help and rescue people from trouble. To all intents and purposes, after Douglas Finnegan had been beaten up badly and undergoing rehabilitation so that he could no longer work, the Finnegan family could no longer afford their living expenses. Neil Fauntleroy had insisted his daughter Anna, her husband Douglas, along with his grandson Howie, move straight back into Anna's childhood home to live with them again. "Goodness gracious me, love! You lived with us all your childhood. Move in again. It'll be wonderful to have you back home. You know your mother. She'll be clucking around little Howie like a mother hen. And our grandson will be spoilt rotten." "But, Dad, I don't want to impose on you like this," Anna had insisted. "You've looked after me all your life. You shouldn't have to be doing it all over again. I am grown up now, you know." "And you've grown up into a fine young woman as well. But impose," her father had chuckled. "You're speaking a foreign language to me, Anna. You could never impose on your family. You've always been our entire world. When you left home to marry Douglas Finnegan and to start a brand new life for yourself, your mother suffered from empty nest syndrome for a very long time. You didn't know any of this. She didn't want you to know, but it was pretty bad at the time. She missed you so very much, so she will be very glad that you're living under our roof again, even if it is in less than favourable circumstances." Neil Fauntleroy always managed to find the perfect solution to fit the problem, and judging by the excited look on her father's face on this rather mediocre, undistinguished evening, Anna knew her father had found the answer to her family's problems. Was she surprised? Of course not. Throughout her childhood, her father had fixed every problem, as if it was simple as brushing dogs' hairs off an overcoat. This evening he'd come into the living room, looking quite flustered, like an over-enthusiastic dog, gagging for a walk, but trying to remain composed at the very same time. The family was watching television together. Her father had gestured to Anna urgently. "Anna," he almost whispered, "I need a word with you, if I may. It's important." Anna discreetly left her family in the living room, watching television together, but they had been so absorbed by the programme that they were watching that they barely noticed her getting to her feet to follow her father into his rather debonair study, with its polished walnut desk and very comfortable upholstered wing chairs. She took a seat, as he gestured for her to take one. She sat next to her father. Together they spilled over the computer. She noticed her father had the computer anchored on a page, displaying a rather obscure, ambiguously vague advertisement. "Ah, here it is," said her father. "This is the advert that I want you to see," he said, clicking onto a headline which read, "Looking for the perfect job in an idyllic location? This might be the perfect job for you." "Look here, Anna," he said, sounding rather pleased with himself. "I've found the ideal job for your husband. It's a place on the Oregon coast called Ocean Spray. A wealthy family own the property. They're looking for a caretaker come landscape gardener to oversee the premises for them, while they're not in habitation there. The family live in the Hollywood Hills in Los Angeles, and Ocean Spray is a holiday home for them. They need the grounds to be kept in excellent shape, and for someone to oversee the regular maintenance and cleaning of the manor house itself. They will provide your family with your own cottage on the grounds. The salary is handsome. Douglas was a landscape gardener in the past, was he not? This kind of job would be a walk in the park for him. You know how much he loves designing gardens and working out of doors. This job could have been tailor-made for your husband, like a fine suit you might buy at an exclusive tailor's."
"It sounds too good to be true, Dad. I know you mean well, but there are bound to be other people desirous for this job. There is no guarantees that Douglas will get it, especially if they learn he was recently badly injured. That could be off-putting for any potential employer. They might think he's physically compromised. And if they even have the teeniest inkling that he was beaten up by a couple of thugs, they might think he's bad news. Nobody wants to employ people like that, who lightly bring chaos with them wherever they go, like an extra piece of rather inappropriate hand luggage."
Anna's father became saliently solemn and rather composed for a moment.
"Do you really think when people are looking for a job, Anna, they tell their potential employer anything that might jeopardize their opportunity in getting the job? Of course not. They brush over the nuts and bolts they don't want to be seen, so as not to draw attention to them."
He paused for a moment and continued,
"I really think this is the perfect job for your husband, Anna. It would mean you get to leave Chicago. Your being out of state will bring me and your mother great relief, because we will feel more assured about your personal safety. I took the liberty of making a few phone calls, Anna, on Douglas's behalf. I hope you don't mind. I spoke to the owner of Ocean Spray. The gentleman's name is Claudio Fiorento. He's in his early 60s. A very amenable man, he seemed. I told him about your husband's previous job in construction, overseeing everything, and that he'd recently recovered from an injury, but was fit to work again. I mentioned he'd been a landscape gardener for a long while. When I told him this, he was genuinely impressed, and asked me to send him your husband's CV, which I did. He liked the fact that Douglas had managerial skills, and was an excellent landscape gardener to boot, which were the two quintessential qualities he was looking for in his caretaker."
Anna raised a brow.
"What? Did he get back to you?"
"He did better than that, Anna,"
said her father proudly, his face breaking out into a satisfied broad beam.
"It's very good news indeed," he said, rubbing his hands in glee. "He has as good as offered Douglas the job, if he wants it. But there is one catch. Douglas needs to phone him right away to have a chat. And providing all goes well in that interview, then the Oregon coast and the promise for new beginnings happily awaits you, my love. What do you say, love? Isn't this the greatest news ever?"
Anna threw her arms around her father, wrapping him in a warm, appreciative embrace.
"What did I do to deserve you, Dad? I must have been a saint in a previous life."
"It's nothing, love," said Anna's father modestly. "You're my daughter. I would do anything and more for you. You know that. When you told me about those notes Douglas was receiving in the post, well, I knew you needed to get the hell out of Chicago. We won't tell Douglas we know about those insidious messages he received, that he hid under the mattress, but we must actively encourage him that it's in his very best interest to accept this job and to leave Glencoe at once."
"I'll go and get him right away," said Anna eagerly. "How could he possibly turn an offer like this down, Dad? Christmas doesn't come along every day, you know."
"I'm not sure," said Douglas, when he read the advertisement online. "I know you mean well, Neil," he said, looking up at his father-in-law gratefully. "I appreciate all you're doing for me, but I'm not sure this is for me. Besides, it's an awfully long way from Chicago."
Anna indignantly felt the heat rise in her chest. She looked like she wanted to throttle her husband. How dare he disregard a job like this, when golden opportunities like this didn't come along every day. Her husband had been out of work for an entire year, and it wasn't easy getting back on your feet again after such a huge setback, and employers weren't exactly beating down doors to hire her husband after the unfortunate incident that had disabled his ability to work.
as word got around in the industry that Douglas Finnegan had been badly beaten up by thugs. Bad news tends to travel afar, and sticks like the chewing gum under a classroom desk.
"You are kidding me, right?"
said Anna, glaring at her husband furiously.
"You're looking at a gift horse in the mouth, love. Are you? You're going to turn this away? Is that what you're telling me? I think I'm going to be violently sick. Are you absolutely insane? This is the perfect job for you. It's as good as yours, if you only get to phone up the owner to ocean surf now. It's the answer to our family's prayers."
"I'm going to level with you, Douglas," said Neil, soberly intervening on his daughter's behalf. "Anna was turning the mattress the other day in your bedroom. I didn't want to tell you this, but I am going to. I'm afraid she found all the nasty notes you've been receiving through the letterbox, all those ominous threats, and it scared the bejesus out of her. She doesn't feel safe here in Chicago, Douglas, in the circumstances, which I'm sure you can appreciate." "You what?" asked Douglas, glancing from his wife to his father-in-law in abject horror. "You read those notes? They were addressed to me. They were private. You shouldn't go prying into my personal stuff, Anna. It's not right." "Don't get mad with your wife, Douglas. She did what she needed to do for the sake of your family. You need to respect that. You may not appreciate this, Douglas, but my daughter has been under an enormous amount of stress since your grievous accident. It was not only you that was affected by the unfortunate incident. You have absolutely no idea how overwrought Anna has become, not knowing why you were so brutally attacked. Then, beyond anything else, she had to give up her job at the chocolate shop to take care of you, and you were not bringing in an income. We were happy to help and pay for your needs, but our Anna is fiercely independent. She doesn't like relying on us for help, so she's eager for you to get back on your feet again, as we all are." "I hadn't thought of it like that," admitted Douglas. "You make a valid point, Neil. Besides, it would be good to work again, and I do enjoy gardening." "I'm glad you've finally seen sense, Douglas," said Neil. "Look, I know you never told us what really happened when you left the building site that day. You have not been forthcoming about who attacked you. I'm sure you have good reasons for keeping quiet in regards to the matter, and not confiding in the police. What I do know, Douglas, is someone is threatening you and the family. That is what concerns me greatly. If these people were eager to kill you, and failed in their malicious endeavors to achieve their goals, you yourself should be concerned. They are not sending you threats like this for nothing. I would take those threats seriously indeed. I'm in no doubt that you are all in grave danger. You need to get the hell out of Chicago fast, for my daughter's and grandchild's sake. And the way I see it, son, is that you are running out of choices. I found this job online for you, and you're going to get on that phone now and accept the offer at once, and then you're going to drive to Oregon as soon as possible, and be as discreet as you can about this move. I think it'll be a great new start for you."
"Even if I run away to Oregon, these people will likely find me," said Douglas. "People like that never go away, do they? They're like the ticks on a dog's back. You can't shake them off." "That's maybe true, Douglas, but in my experience, out of sight is out of mind. If you've moved further away from here, they can't keep such a beady eye on you, can they? They will likely focus on other things besides you. And let's not kid, if you were going to spill on them, you'd have done so a long time ago, would you not? I think they will feel reasonably assured you won't blabber about them. But then you being so much further away is going to create distance between you and them. And the way I see that, it's got to be a jolly good thing." "When you put it like that," said Douglas, in a resigned acceptance, "I suppose then it makes perfect sense." He waved a hand at both Neil and Anna, in an abstract gesture of dismissal. "Now you two get out of the office for a moment. I have a call to make with Claudia Fiorento,
whom I suspect has some Italian lineage, with a name like that. It's quite the giveaway, is it not? Good on you, son, said Neil, slapping his son-in-law on the back proudly. You are doing the right thing.
It was when Douglas came out of Neil Fauntleroy's office and entered the living room, where they were all gathered together watching television as a family. Anna noticed his face had grown as white as a ghost, and for one horrifying moment she did wonder if her husband had recklessly declined the job with Claudia Fiorento. She was sure she detected a flicker of guilt in his eyes, which suggested he had something to convey that was not good. She drew in a deep breath, straightening up her back, as if she was afraid she needed some extra scaffolding to hold her up when her husband delivered the unfortunate blow. The last year had been tumultuous and difficult, to say the very least. She was used to things just crumbling apart in her hands like a cookie. Was this new job at Ocean Spray, that looked so promising, going to blow up in their faces? "What on earth is wrong, Douglas? Why are you so pale?" she asked circumspectively. "You have accepted the job, have you not, with Claudia Fiorento?" Her stomach dipped with trepidation as she awaited her husband's answer.
Of course I have, said Douglas. But I told Mr. Claudia Fiorento that we are leaving tonight. He was very eager for me to start working for him as soon as possible. He suggested we leave right away, as it will take us 2 days on the road to get there, with an overnight stop along the way. Some of these wealthy, very affluent people can be a little entitled and demanding. It's like they snap their fingers like that and expect you to jump. I found myself saying yes to the man. If the truth be told, I doubt he even heard the word no ever being uttered to him in his life. He was nice enough, of course, but goodness gracious me, he knows what he wants and he sure as hell gets it. All I can say is I'm glad he won't be on the property, supervising things for most of the time, while I'm manning the fort and taking care of the gardens and the house for him. I would hate to have him breathing down my neck like the proverbial dragon.
What? Are you telling me you actually told Claudia Fiorento we would leave right now, at the drop of a hat? Just like that? Are you crazy? Said Anna, looking confounded. But we can't. We've got things to pack. We can't just leave like that. We've got to organise everything. This is completely crazy.
What's stopping you, love? Asked Anna's father. If I were you, I would get packing right away, he said encouragingly, giving Douglas a wink. This is very good news indeed. Leaving as soon as possible is a fabulous idea as far as I'm concerned. The sooner you get away from Chicago, the better, and there's no time like the present. The way I see it, the less people that know about you leaving, the better. The two of you need to get packing Anna's Fiat as soon as possible.
Oh, this is the best news, said Anna's mother, throwing her arms up in the air in delight. I always felt uneasy about you staying here in Chicago with us after Douglas's dreadful accident. I often had a sense that someone had been following us around, watching the house. It's going to be hard you're leaving, but I am glad that you are, for your own safety.
I felt that too, said Anna, looking startled. You never told me this, Mum. I've always had a sense that I've been watched.
Well, I didn't want to worry you, did I, love? You've had enough on your plates. But I think leaving Chicago is an excellent idea. I really do. It'll be a monumental load off my mind, knowing you're a hell of a lot safer where you are. Of course we'll come and visit you at your new cottage, at the earliest opportunity, once you've settled in, and Howie has adjusted to his brand new school. My advice is to pack lightly. Take the bare minimum if you can. Your father will bring all the extra stuff up in a trailer for you at a later stage. The main thing is you need to leave for your own safety.
Anna and Douglas had spent the rest of the evening industriously packing up their suitcases. They had decided to take very little. Anna had woken up little Howie to tell him to get packed. He appeared to be very confused, and through bleary eyes congealed by sleep and a cacophony of yawns,
he asked in surprise. "What's going on? Where are we going? Why are you waking me up in the middle of the night like this? I don't understand." "You need to get packed, love. We're going on a road trip. We're moving to Oregon. We're leaving right now. I need you to hurry up," said Anna in a no-nonsense sufficient tone of voice she usually used on her son when chivvying him up to get ready for the school bus in the morning. Howie, bewildered, looked from his mother to his father, wondering if this was some kind of warped joke, but he could tell by their stoic demeanours his parents were being deadly serious. "But we're moving! You never said anything. But why? I like it here with Granny's house. I like it here." "Sweetheart, I know you do. But we can't stay here forever. We can't outstay our welcome. We need to find a place of our own, don't we? Your father has been given a fabulous new job in Oregon. The owner of a property where we're going wants him to leave for the job right now, and your father has agreed. It's very last minute, you know, but we're going right away." "But what about school and my friends at school?" asked Harry, looking bemused. "I haven't even said goodbye to Anton and Parker yet. They'll be very upset with me if I don't even bother to tell them that we're moving away." "I know, love, it's very disappointing, but it just can't be helped in the circumstances. But you can WhatsApp them, can't you, and explain why you had to leave so suddenly. That way you'll be able to keep talking to them. And when we come back here to Glencoe to visit your grandparents, we can look up your friends, can't we?" Her reassuring words seemed to calm down her rather wilful son, who was not terribly amused by this drastic turn of events. It had been hard for all of them to leave the house in Glencoe that they had shared with Anna's parents for an entire year. Anna noticed that her mother was particularly sad to see them go. She was struggling to hold it together and to fight back the tears. She was trying to plaster a watery smile on her face that did not successfully meet her eyes. "Goodbye, love," she said, wrapping her arms around her daughter affectionately. "I'm going to miss the all of you so very much. Have a very safe journey. You better get going, or I'm going to fall apart. I can't bear goodbyes of any kind." "Mum, please don't cry," said Anna pleadingly. "You'll get me started, and I'm not a pretty crier. We're going to be fine, I promise you, Mum. Please don't worry about anything. I'll call you when we get there." She had reluctantly walked to her Fiat, climbed into the front seat, started up the engine, while her parents, watching from the front door of their house, seemed so subdued and sad. They both held hands, and they waved. It had been a dark night, lit up by a very long line of street lights, and with a heavy heart the family left Chicago behind, like a butterfly flying away from a familiar alpine field to one significantly further away, not really knowing what lay ahead of them on this new uncharted path. Anna wound up the window of the car to appease her son, even though they were probably now only a stone's throw away from ocean spray, and would soon be disembarking from their ever-so-long road trip any time soon, which was a relief, as every single part of Anna's body ached with exhaustion, most especially her lower back, which was giving her grief. "I'm freezing cold, Mummy," Howie complained bitterly. "I wish you hadn't opened the window like that, to let in all the cold air. Why did you have to do that?" he groaned. "I'm so sorry, love. I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize you were getting so terribly cold. I have to say that smell was just too awful for words. I had to get it out of here. But we're very nearly there, love. Not long to go now. It's been an unending 29-hour journey, which we've divided overnight with a rest stop. But it's been one hell of a trip, and I never thought it would come to an end. But I'm very proud of you, Howie. You haven't complained once. You've been remarkably well behaved." "You better get used to the cold, kiddo," said Douglas, turning around to look directly at Howie, with a warm, affectionate smile on his face. "I have to warn you, Howie. The Oregon coast can get bitterly cold, much like Chicago at times. Where is your sweater? It might be good to put it on." I left it in my luggage. You said we were going to be arriving at the coast. I thought it would be warm here, said Howie despondently. I wasn't to know it was going to get chilly, was I?
You'll soon learn, Howie. When living at the coast with all these cooling sea breezes, the weather is capriciously unreliable. It can be cold at the very best of times. You need to be prepared for all eventualities, so it's advisable to always keep a sweater at hand, his father pointed out.
I don't like the cold,
said Howie, contorting his face in disgust.
If we'd moved to Florida, it would be a lot warmer, wouldn't it? Because you can swim in the sea there. The water is lovely and warm. The weather is always good there. Why did we move here if the coast is cold? This place is horrible. I'm tired. I'm sick of travelling for so long. When are we going to get to this place anyway? I feel as if we've driven to the moon and back. It's been 2 whole days on the road, with an overnight stop at that horrible seedy hotel that stank of cigarette smoke and Indian spices. If we'd been on a plane, we'd have got here sooner. I hate travelling by car. It takes forever to get to your destination.
The mind boggles, doesn't it, love, that we've been on the road for so long. I couldn't agree with you more, Howie. You put it perfectly. Flying here would have been much better. Your father did not get a job offer in Florida, I'm afraid, she said obsequiously. I know Florida is a really lovely, lovely place. We've been there often enough, haven't we? Summer holidays spent there. But believe it or not, Oregon is beautiful. You just need to give it a chance, dear. I'm sure the place will grow on you eventually. I've heard wonderful things about the Oregon coast. I came here once as a little girl, you know, and I had a wonderful, wonderful time with my parents. Yes, the seawater was cold, but that didn't really matter. There were so many other wonderful things to do. And I certainly have some nostalgic memories of this place, you know. Howie glanced bleakly out of the window of the back seat of the Fiat, his mouth turning upside down into a sizable frown. He stared out at the ocean blankly.
Florida's much better than this, Mum. Everything is so grey here. Look at that gloomy sky. It's horrible.
It looks like that, love, because it's overcast. But when the weather lifts, you'll be surprised how beautiful it is when the sun comes out. The Fiat's engine continued to take strain as it rolled up the steep hilly incline, rattling precariously like a struggling athlete that doesn't know if he's going to make it to the top of the hill without passing out from sheer exhaustion and superhuman effort. The showy views of the ocean waves crashing against the shore, with its fragrant delivery of white spray, would have been spectacular, Anna thought, if the weather had not magnanimously let the side down. On this late, beleaguered afternoon, bundles of fluffy white clouds gathered together across the horizon, while the blue sky had been confiscated by a smouldering grey colour that sulkily brooded like a cranky, cantankerous old man who had decided to spend the afternoon engaged in a long, pouting sulk that didn't look likely to abate any time soon. "Cheer up, Howie, will you?" said his father. "I assure you the coastline doesn't always look as miserable as this. When the weather is fine, I'm sure you're going to have a whale of a time here."
"But I have friends in Chicago,"
Howie protested indignantly.
"I don't know anybody out here. What if I hate my new school? What if I don't make any friends?"
"That is not going to happen, love, and you know that," said Anna. "You've always made friends effortlessly easy, Howie. You're one of those lucky people that has no problem in that regard. I'm sure you're going to love your new school and make lots and lots of lovely friends. Once you've got settled, of course. Google says we're nearly there," said Douglas. "You need to take this narrow road at the next turning, Anna." As Anna's fatigued Fiat climbed higher up the unenviable hilly elevation, her grip on the steering wheel intensified. She briefly glanced down from their high position on the road to the long swathe of beach sand below that stretched out generously into a long, ceaselessly, seemingly unending ribbon that appeared to go on for ever and ever, almost as if there was no beginning or end.
And even on this less than congenial, rather grey, cloudy day, Anna had to admit, it all seemed rather prepossessing and quite dramatic. Anna observed a peppering of people, walking with dogs, strolling along the beach, totally undeterred by the disagreeable weather, many sporting sensible parkas and lightweight jackets to keep out the wind. Just as Anna thinks her spluttering Fiat is finally going to give up the ghost, just moments before they actually reach their destination, the hillside mercifully flattens out. She follows the curvaceous bend in the track. There's a sign that points in two directions. The one straight ahead leads to Ocean Spray Manor House, and the arrow to the right leads directly to Ocean Spray Caretaker's cottage. This must be the estate cottage, which is to be their new home for the foreseeable future. Anna's not exactly sure how she's feeling. She has no way of processing her emotions at this particular point in time. That's when she observes a small dark building coming into view. Could this be it, she wonders, as her Fiat glides down the earthen driveway. This was not what she was expecting to see. The dreary place looks disappointingly depressing, but on this overcast grey day, everything looks rather dismal and forlorn. Anna promptly reminds herself that this is inevitable. Everything is going to appear a little grim on first appearances. When Ocean Spray Cottage swings into view, Anna gets an eyeful of the entire cottage. She notices the stonework is both damp and dark, the windows small and crooked. The once white rough plaster on the walls is a little on the grubby side and flaking off in places, rudely exposing the brickwork beneath. The beleaguered roof that has obviously seen better days is coated with a large layer of spongy dark verdant moss, and the stone path leading to the rather scratched-up front door is cracked and rather uneven, with ugly weeds hemorrhaging their way through open apertures in the stone to sully the path. And there, hanging outside the front door, is a bewildered-looking hanging basket full of dying geraniums that have been denied any water for a very long time. Granted, it is rather unwelcoming, but then again one has to remember no one has lived at the caretaker's property for a while, but the owner has given her family carte blanche to do what they liked with the place. Anna is already envisaging herself with a paint roller in hand, bringing a neutral shade to the outside walls. Even a simple paint job could easily transform this place in a second. "That's the cottage!" Howie pipes out from the back of the car, clearly sounding very unimpressed. "It's horrible, Mum. I don't like it at all. There's lots of moss on the roof. That is so gross. I hate it. It's ugly, Mum. It's a witch's cottage. The windows are skew and uneven, and even the chimney is higgledy-piggledy. Sweetheart, you can see how grey the weather is out there this afternoon. You mark my words, even a palace would look grim and uninviting in this weather. I'm sure it's a perfectly lovely cottage," said Anna, trying her damnedest to put a positive spin on things. But one glance at Howie's grim expression tells Anna that her son is resolutely determined to hate this place. And if she's being perfectly honest, she's feeling a little deflated about it too. Douglas does not say a single word. He stares blankly at the cottage, giving nothing away. So Anna has absolutely no comprehension of what he's actually thinking. She's sure he must be feeling a tad disappointed. He probably had not expected the cottage to be so old and unattended to. It must have been one of the original buildings on the property, easily going back over 100 years or so. Anna manoeuvres the Fiat to a right angle, where it comes to a stop outside Ocean Spray Cottage. In a jiffy, Anna's husband and son have simply jumped out of the Fiat so fast, like two people with ants in their pants, desperate to get going. But where were they going? They seemed to be heading to the beach. Anna called out to them, "Douglas, Howie, get back here now! Get back here now! Don't you want to see the cottage?" But they appeared to ignore her. She was expecting them to head straight to the front door, but she watches them in abject astonishment as Douglas and Howie, fired by an impulsive burst of ebullience, run across the yard
heavily fringed by lofty trees on one side. Both of them appeared to be laughing together, which of course is a positive sign, as moments before they were grumbling a great deal. Well, at least Howie was. He looked disgruntled then, but now he's actually wearing a smile on his face. That's got to be a good sign. Maybe the brisk sea air and the crashing sounds of the waves thundering against the rocks has burned up their disfavour towards this place, replacing it with a curious intrigue. She realises they're taking the stone steps that are embedded in the hill, that looks as if they've been there for decades. They lead straight down to the beach. She notices her husband and son are so eager to stretch their legs. She can't blame them for that. They make light work of the staircase, which looks like a formidable amount of stairs to overcome, as it's quite some drop to the beach below. She watches as they become like ants on the horizon, as they disappear from view. She continues to call out to them, to tell them to come back, but her trailing voice is now drowned out by a spirited wind. At least the beach is easily accessible, Anna thinks to herself, glancing out at the ocean stretched out before her, that appears like a grey line on the horizon. She can see spirited waves crashing over collections of sculptural rocks as they gallop towards the shoreline in a spray of white sea foam. The fragrant sweet smell of sea salt in the air is pronounced. A brisk breeze is beating spiritedly against Anna's cheeks. She breaks out into goosebumps. Goodness gracious me! It's cold out here, she thinks, clutching her sweater tightly to her chest, and remembering that poor little Howie is not wearing a sweater at all. He must be feeling the pinch of this chill by now. Anna dubiously makes her way to the front door, uncertain of what she will find when she finally enters the cottage, that carries on its exterior scuffed impressions the marked feeling of abandonment and neglect. The place is longing for a much-needed pampering and makeover. Anna decides that she will be the one to ambitiously transform this cottage. She enjoys a challenge. She used to watch those home improvement programs on television all the time, and has received many pointers on affordable, thrifty ways to make it look as if you've spent a fortune on the place when in reality you've parted with mere pennies. Where is this key, she wonders. She was told there was a hook on the hanging basket. That was where she'd find the key. Anna fumbles rather awkwardly around the dead foliage. Some of it snaps away in her hands. She feels along the rusty bracket for anything that sticks out at a peculiar angle, and then her fingers hit pay dirt. She triumphantly lifts the hugely decorative key into her hand, curiously studying it. It is magnificently decorative. She marvels at the intimate details of the way things were done back in the day. No one would afford such attention to detail on a modern-day key, she thinks. Rather nervously she plungers the key into the lock. The door grumbles and groans as it reluctantly swings open, almost as if undecided whether to welcome her in or not. Anna, with a vacillating hesitancy, crosses the threshold and finally enters the cottage. She's met by the strong, musky smell of dust, but she awkwardly pushes herself through the somewhat draughty entrance hall, across the stone floor, onto wood-panelled floors that creak under her feet. There's a stunning staircase that leads to the upper rooms of the cottage. Anna can see spider webs displayed throughout the house, some that would be particularly appropriate for a Halloween celebration. They give the cottage that spooky, unkept feeling. The furniture is covered in thick dust sheets, which need to be removed. The dust in the air is so cloyingly thick, so incredibly unpleasant. Anna feels congestion in her chest building up, squeezing out all her oxygen. Working fast and furiously, Anna industriously, with a sense of efficient purpose, is driven to open up all the windows to let in the fresh air. Whew! That is so much better, she thinks. She begins to randomly grab handfuls of dust sheets that is shrouding all the furniture. She throws them out onto the wraparound porch, which you access through a sliding door in the small lounge, with its low ceiling and overhanging wooden beams. The room boasts a red-bricked central fireplace that will likely look very cosy during the winter months, with a roaring fire burning away merrily in the hearth. Anna decides the cottage is really quaint, as she takes in the mismatched furniture, a chunky woven blanket
is artfully splashed over a wing chair in the corner of the living room. The oakwood shelves, with the mint green backdrop in the alcoves on both sides of the fireplace, are filled with leather-bound books that look to be ancient. Much of the furniture is a collection of collectible, eclectic Georgian antiques. There is no doubt, with a good clean-up, this little charming cottage, with its 4 bedrooms and old-fashioned vintage kitchen, could end up becoming quite beautiful, and Anna decides quite emphatically she'll make damn sure that that's the case. This is a new opportunity for her family to make something of their lives and to begin again, putting behind them the stagnant, rather stale past. Where are the others? She thinks, feeling ever so slightly annoyed. Her husband and son had infuriatingly still not returned from their spontaneous, somewhat impulsive stroll on the beach. Time was marching steadily forward. The dimming light of the late afternoon was fading, and slowly but surely teetering into the evening. Feeling a nervous trepidation rising up from her gut, Anna glances rather nervously out of the main living room window that overlooks the coastline. Where are they? She thinks, looking around. The grey, previously sullen sky is darkening significantly. She can see the shimmering outline of the pearly moon, peering through the dark sky, like a reticent outer-worldly round disk. Anna shuffles around in the large cupboard in the hall, and finds exactly what she's looking for. She retrieves a hoover and a duster, and begins to ambitiously work on cleaning away the dust, just to make the environment more breathable, even though the ingestion of fresh air has certainly freshened the place up exponentially. The exhaustion that Anna had felt from a long day spent trapped behind the wheel of her Fiat had been momentarily suspended by her ardent determination to make the cottage feel more welcoming and presentable for the others when they finally did return from their little soiree on the beach. But what was keeping them for so long? If father and son were not careful, they might not find their way back to the cottage without a torch at hand. Anna luckily remembers her husband does have a miniature torch on his keyring, and he has a cell phone torch as well, even though the light is less than satisfactory on that thing. So they should be able to find their way back to the cottage, but she suspects they're frolicking around the beach like a couple of wild, untethered stallions. She knows all too well what her husband can be like. He can be a big child at times. The one thing about Douglas and Howie that Anna knows from bitter experience is that both father and son are inclined to get carried away, easily distracted. Anna can count on her hands 3 times over the amount of times those two returned home late, oblivious to how much time had been swallowed up. More recently, as she was residing in Glencoe with her parents, she had asked her husband to go off to town to pick up some bread for dinner, to accompany their meal that evening. Howie had gone along with his father for the ride. Hours had passed by. Her parents had long since retired to bed, after eating the meal, minus the bread that Douglas had promised. Douglas and Howie rocked up later, about 5 hours late. "Sorry," her husband had said. "Me and Howie got waylaid." She had pursed her lips tightly, so she didn't scream blue murder at them. "Daddy bumped into an old friend," Howie had explained. "They took us out for dinner. We had a swell time, didn't we, Daddy? I had hamburgers and milkshake, and Daddy had a steak." Anna was absolutely furious. She'd have liked to have slammed one of her fists into her husband's cheek to get her revenge, but he'd been pulverized enough already. There was no point in inflicting further damage on the poor man. "What the hell is wrong with you, Douglas?" she had screamed. "I had in mind to call the police. You've been gone for ages. I've been worried sick. I was wondering if you were caught up in a car accident or something. I was going to phone all the hospitals. Didn't even it cross your mind, Douglas, to pick up that little gadget we call a cell phone that you happen to carry with you everywhere, for your convenience, to tell me that you'd be back later?" Her husband had guiltily glanced down at his cell phone to look at the time. He had whistled in astonishment. "Sorry, love. I had no idea we were this late. I felt like we were gone for just minutes, but it was obviously hours." Now, like an old record playing the same old tune,
Her husband and son were performing the same old charade again, but Anna refused to worry about them. She knew only too well what they were like, and after the long drawn-out road trip, she was too frayed at the edges to actually care. She knew she was close to flopping down on the bed like a rag doll and falling into a deep, blissfully ignorant sleep, where she could be contained in the apathetic world of her dreams, and right now that felt like a welcome relief for her. Moments later, very thankfully, the door of the cottage swung open. Anna could hear the shuffle of feet, the mumble of voices, the trill of happy laughter. She drew in a relieved breath. They must be home, she thinks. She hears her son call out, "We're back, Mummy! We're back from the beach!" Howie bullets excitedly through the cottage, like a frenzied dog that hasn't seen his owner in an absolute age. Finally he finds his mother. She can tell by the animated look on his face that he's burning to tell her something. "This place is amazing, Mum! Absolutely amazing! I love it here! I love it!" he said, sounding breathless. "You're never going to believe what happened to me, Mum! I still can't believe it happened! The rock pools on the beach, they're brilliant! They're brilliant! They're so clear! I saw a starfish! I saw a sea anemone! I saw an octopus, Mum!" "Sounds wonderful," said Anna. "I'm listening. Go on, tell me what happened. I see you're bursting to tell me, so spill." "We went on the beach, walking, didn't we, Dad? Dad got talking to an old lady called Verity Onassa. She was a very nice old lady, wasn't she, Dad?" "That's absolutely right," Douglas agreed. "Very nice old lady she was too. Lived in these parts for years and years. She's living in her old family home that she grew up in as a little girl, on the beach not too far from here. She says this is an absolutely idyllic location to live. This stretch of coastline, she believes, is the best. When the sun's out, apparently the views over the ocean are absolutely breathtaking. She says there was a caretaker living here at Ocean Spray Cottage about 1.5 years ago, but the couple left the place in a hurry, without even giving their notice to Mr. Fiorentino. The bad news is it seems that the Fiorentinos have had dozens of caretakers over the years here at Ocean Spray Cottage. None of them stayed for very long. They seem to all make a hasty retreat, without any rational rhyme or reason, I believe." "This is very odd. You called him Fioretta, now you're calling him Fiorentino. What is it, love?" "Does it really matter? I don't understand Italian names. They're impossible to pronounce. I'll just call him whatever I'll call him." "It sounds so ominous, doesn't it, love?" said Anna, pulling a disappointed face. "I mean, all these caretakers leaving like this." This she didn't want to hear. "Did this Mrs. Onassis give an explanation, a plausible one, as to why all these caretakers made such a hasty retreat from the cottage? I mean, do you think it's your boss? You suggested he might be a taskmaster. Did he drive them all away by demanding too much of them, I wonder?" she asked gingerly. "No, it was nothing like that," said Douglas, his brow furrowing in perplexement. "That's the funny thing. When I broached the subject, well, it seemed a delicate one, I have to say, to try and get her to tell me what had made the caretakers leave, Mrs. Onassa became ambiguously evasive. She promptly changed the subject, which I thought was profoundly odd. But this woman could talk the leaves off a tree. But to be fair, she was a very interesting person. Her conversation was not mediocre. She's one of these people that you could listen to for hours on end and never get remotely bored. She sounds intriguing. I look forward to meeting her. I'd like to meet her, I really would. I don't doubt that if she lived here for so many years, she could give me a few pointers about schools and good eating places in this area." "Well, Daddy was talking with this old lady for a long time," said Howie, interjecting, and rolling his eyes. "You know what Daddy's like, Mummy. He can talk and talk, but this woman was 1,000 times worse. She could talk more than Daddy can." "Oh dear," said Anna, unable to suppress a giggle. It was like two parrots getting together, was it, Howie?" she said, giving her husband a mischievous wink.
Her anger towards her husband and son had dissipated. She was glad to see them looking so radiantly happy. She hadn't seen Howie looking so freshly fired up for a long time, and seeing him like this was a promising start. It would seem over the last year, after Douglas had begun the long journey of recuperating from all his injuries, the harrowing effects of the inexplicable incident had taken its withering toll on absolutely everyone. For a while Douglas had slipped into a deep depression, and his dark moods and snappy demeanour had affected Howie, who had been described by the teachers as becoming increasingly withdrawn, which had been a worry for Anna, as Howie had always been gregariously expressive. So to see a glimmer of the more ebullient Howie resurfacing again was reassuring. Maybe moving here to the Oregon coast had been a blessing in disguise after all.
"Well," said Howie, "I knew Daddy was talking to the old lady for far too long, and I was getting really bored. I decided to go to the rock pool myself. Daddy didn't even know. He didn't even notice I was gone, 'cause he was so busy talking and talking," said Howie, chuckling.
"Howie, listen to me. You know I'm not happy about what you did," said Douglas, reprimanding his son. "I told you to stick with me on the beach, but you disobeyed me."
"But Dad, I wasn't going to drown. I can swim, you know, and I'm not a baby anymore, and besides I wasn't going too far away from you. I could see you from the rocks."
"That is not the point, Howie. Your father makes a very good point. It was very naughty and mischievous of you to wander off like that. You should have listened to your father. You should have remained at his side, even if this woman was talking too much. We're new to this part of the world, Howie. We've got a lot to learn about living here. It's a great deal of adjustment. Besides, it was getting dark. It was late afternoon. You could have got hopelessly lost. From what I can see, there's a large stretch of beach out there that goes on for many miles. There's lots of wooded areas around here as well, so it can be incredibly confusing. Anyway, go on with your story, Howie. You went to the rock pool, and what happened next?" she said, waiting for her son to predictably tell her about the creatures he had lightly seen in the rock pool. She had enjoyed similar discoveries herself when she was a little girl, but she had not prepared herself for what Howie would tell her next.
"It was amazing, Mum, absolutely amazing. The rock pools were so plentiful, Mum, full of baby fish, interesting-looking things. It was getting darker, but I could still see clearly. I was lying flat over the rocks, Mummy, my legs outstretched. I peered into the water and I was looking at all the sea creatures. And then, Mummy, I knew something was watching me. I could see a flash of a shadowy silhouette in the water, and I thought for a second I'd seen a face. I looked up, Mummy, and I saw him. Can you believe it? I actually saw him, Mummy."
"You saw what, Howie?" asked Anna. "You're not being very clear, love. Who exactly did you see, or what did you see?"
"I saw a Bigfoot. He was looking right at me, Mummy. He was really big, covered in long, dark hair. He had nice eyes. I couldn't believe it, Mummy, 'cause I didn't know that Bigfoots could actually talk, but he spoke to me. Not loudly like you and Daddy talk. He talked to me in my head. I heard his voice, Mummy. He had a very nice deep voice. He said, 'So you're living up there.' He pointed at Ocean Spray Cottage, Mummy. He said,
'You've moved in today. I heard you were coming. The old lady told me you were on your way.'
The Bigfoot is clever, Mummy. Really clever. 'Cause it knew, Mum, we'd moved to this cottage. He seemed really pleased about it. He said the old lady had a message for our family, that I was to tell you that we are welcome to live in her cottage. She said apparently that she didn't like the other ones that stayed here. She's very particular, the Bigfoot told me. He said the old lady likes him to scare the ones she doesn't like away from the cottage. He said the old lady was very good friends with his father when his father was alive, so he said he had to look out for her on his father's behalf. He had promised his father that he would be faithful to keep his promises. Then after the Bigfoot told me this really funny story, Mum, he just turned around and glided away.
He was carrying an octopus in his huge hands. I think he was going to eat it, Mum. His fingers were as big as sausages, and I'm not kidding. He was big, Mum. I think he might have been 9 foot tall. His shoulders were ginormous. He had deep-set, dark, hooded eyes. They were kind. So I wasn't afraid of him at all. Some people say Bigfoots are horrible, Mum. But I don't agree, 'cause he was really nice to me, and he wasn't scary at all. But if he was horrible towards me, he'd have been very scary, 'cause he's very, very big. I still can't believe the Bigfoot actually spoke to me, Mummy. I don't understand what he was talking about when he was talking about the old lady to me, and said that she says we're welcome to live here. It's a bit weird, don't you think? I wonder what old lady he's talking about. I stood there, Mummy. I was watching him, said Howie excitedly. My mouth must have dropped open, because it was just so shocking to see this Bigfoot. And when he walked away from me, it was like he was floating on air. He glided across the sea sand towards the trees, and that was when I saw another Bigfoot that was waiting there for him by a crooked oak tree. I very nearly didn't see her, 'cause she blended so well into the background. He handed her the octopus he caught. I knew she was female 'cause she had boobies, little ones. She was smaller than him. He was much bigger. He towered over her. She looked pleased when he gave her the octopus. They both nodded at me, Mum. They were very, very friendly. Can you believe that? Now you know why I think this place is absolutely amazing. I saw 2 Bigfoots. That would never have ever happened in Chicago. Can you believe that? I used to go to bed at night, Mum, praying that I'd meet a Bigfoot. And it happened. God answered my prayers. I can't believe it. Anna met her husband's eyes, and they clandestinely exchanged furtive looks. She knew what this was about. Her son was making up fictitious stories to get their undivided attention. She remembered how Howie had absolutely been delighted by the series on television. What was it called again? She struggled to remember the name, until a memory conveniently surged into her mind. Of course, the programme was called Finding Bigfoot. She vividly recalled how Howie had sat transfixed in front of the television, with wide eyes focused on the television screen. He had been riveted about the programme, so fascinated about the subject of Bigfoot. "Nan," he would tirelessly say, "I want to see a Bigfoot." "I'm sure you'd like to see one," Anna had told him. "But they may not be real, son. Even if they do exist, the chances of you meeting such an elusive creature are quite remote." "Not if you pray they aren't," Howie had said insistently, as if his mother's sceptical words were like caustic acid being flung across his face. He hated the way his mother was so sceptically scathing about everything. "Mrs. Grimshaw at Sunday school says that if we have lots and lots of faith, we can move a mountain." "Well, as eloquent as Mrs. Grimshaw may be," Anna told her son, "I don't think I've ever heard of anyone who's moved a mountain before, have you? If it was so easy, it would have been done a long time ago, don't you think?" Howie looked at his mother in exasperation, as if he thought she was terribly silly. "I don't think anybody would ever want to move a mountain, Mum. Mrs. Grimshaw was using that as an example of the power of faith, that's all. She wasn't meaning anyone would actually choose to move a mountain." Anna was certain that Howie was frenziedly feeding his overactive imagination with warped, outlandish ideas that she wanted to actively discourage. His outlandish behaviour needed nipping in the bud before it got out of hand. She had never heard him talk like this before. Furthermore, incorrigibly, he had been so earnest, and she would normally have believed him when he spoke with so much passion. But a Bigfoot? I'm sorry. He never saw that creature for a moment. There was no possible way his story could be remotely credible. And what was all this nonsense about an old lady saying that the family were welcome to stay at Ocean Spray Cottage? She had never heard anything so ridiculous before in her entire life.
They had moved into Ocean Spray Cottage as the new caretakers, having been hired by Mr. Claudio Fiorentino, or Fioretto, whatever his name was. This was the man who owned the estate. There was no old lady involved in the arrangements. What would people think if her son went around randomly telling people fictitious stories like this? They'd think that her son was as mad as a March hare, even though he was only 10. It was fanciful thinking on his part. And as for Bigfoot talking to him, Anna had never heard of anything so weird in her entire life. Had the heady sea air gone straight to Howie's head? After the long drawn-out journey, it would seem so. Maybe he was so fatigued, so absolutely exhausted, that he was seeing things that weren't actually there, and being unable to distinguish between his imagination and reality. Children could get the both very confused at times.
Look, love, you and I well know you didn't see a Bigfoot. You know you're making all this up. I know you loved that program you used to watch on television all the time. Finding Bigfoot, about people who had had possible Bigfoot sightings. You fancied the idea of meeting a Bigfoot, didn't you? But I want you to know that what you saw on the beach may be what you wanted to see. It was dark out there. You probably saw a shadow of somebody walking across the beach and told yourself that you were observing a Bigfoot. My guess is you are very tired. It's understandable, love. We've been driving on the road for hours. It's very debilitating driving for a long time. It can knock the stuffing out of you, you know.
Howie frowned. Tears of frustration crept up into his eyes, threatening to roll down his cheeks, but he stoically held them back. He didn't want his mother to see him crying.
You don't believe me, do you? Why would I make this up, Mum? I'm not a liar. I don't tell stories. I told you the Bigfoot spoke to me. Why won't you believe me? I saw one on the beach. Why would he talk to me about a strange old lady that I know nothing about? He had a squirming octopus in his hand. It was dangling in his fingers. Do you think I'd make this all up? I saw the female Bigfoot in the trees. He gave her the octopus. She was pleased about it. Maybe she was hungry and he went to get her a snack. She looked right at me, Mum. She had dark eyes and her eyes met mine. She was nice too. She nodded as if she was saying hello to me. She seemed really friendly. They both chatted together for a while. They spoke like you and me, but their language was kind of funny. And when they talk, they wave their arms around a lot to express themselves like you do when you're playing charades so people can guess what you're acting out. When they went away, I distinctly heard the distant trail of their chattering voices, and then they were gone. Dad came looking for me after that, and we came home. He was talking so much about the old lady he met on the beach that I never told him about the Bigfoot.
You really expect me to believe all this nonsense, Howie? Said Anna, raising a brow. You and I know very well that this did not happen. It's not good to make up stories like this. Little Howie marched out of the living room indignantly, stamping his feet in frustration. He slammed the door behind him so hard that Anna almost jumped out of her skin. Oh dear, that went well, she said, looking at her husband and rolling her eyes in the back of her head in frustration. What? She asked, when she noticed Douglas giving her a approving look. What? Why are you looking at me like that, love? There's no need to be so hard on little Howie, said her husband. He's only 10, Anna, for goodness sake. Give him a breather, won't you? We've had a long, exhausting 2-day trip on the road. We're all fatigued and frayed at the edges. If little Howie wants to believe he saw a Bigfoot on the beach, why on earth don't you humour him? Do you really have to ruin everything for our little boy by throwing cold water on his imagination? We should encourage our children to be visionaries, to enlarge their imaginations, not to stifle them. That's the problem with this coming generation, you know. They don't use their imaginations nearly enough. And I blame technology for that. It's overtaken their lives. We need to encourage the dreamers, the poets and the writers, to galvanize their creative energies, to make this a better world for the all of us. There could be a writer in our son, and you being hell-bent on crushing his imagination like this is a bad idea if you ask me."
Anna sighed. "Well, you do make a good point when you put it like that. Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been hard on Howie." 1 week later. It was almost impossible to believe that an entire week had gone by at Ocean Spray Cottage, and in that short space of time so much had happened. Anna had been efficiently productive in making Ocean Spray into a cosy den for the family. It was almost as if they'd lived here for a very long time. The family settled into Ocean Spray Cottage seamlessly. Anna had hired a local painter to give the cottage a much-needed makeover, which included a crisp white coat of paint on the outside exterior walls. She had chosen lilac paint for the shutters, the outer frames of the windows, and the front door, and it really did look rather fetching. Anna couldn't help but wonder why on earth she had chosen a colour like lilac for the shutters. It had never been her favourite colour. But when she looked at the paint charts when selecting colours to choose from, she was drawn to picking lilac for reasons she could not comprehend. And even her rather cautious husband had to admit that the lilac influences on the cottage gave the place an ethereal look, like a delicate piece of Wedgwood china. The spongy green moss had been removed from the roof. Anna had thrown out the dead geraniums from the hanging basket and replaced them with a tumble of lilac geraniums, a mix of purple pansies and lobelia. The irony is she would never have chosen lilac geraniums like this, but they complemented the shutters and the outer look of the property, and it all worked. She had planted a mixed collection of flowers in container pots, all once again lilac and purple influences, which she placed in the front of the cottage. It really looked as if the cottage had undergone a miraculous makeover and had been dragged away from its former sense of neglect that had embodied the place when they had first arrived. Anna had industriously, with a dogged, zealous determination, scrubbed and cleaned Ocean Spray Cottage from top to bottom, so that it shone like a brand new pin, with sparkling windows and polished furniture. She had bought some odds and ends and little knick-knacks from a place called Home Decor to give the cottage that in-home feeling, and once again she had incorporated soft lilac influences in the items that she had purchased, like a fluffy lilac throw and some lilac and grey cushions for the chairs. Their little nest had become sumptuously cosy and very welcoming. The views from the living room windows that overlooked the frolicking ocean on a warm, sunny day became almost an aquamarine colour. It was so prepossessing. Anna had always dreamed of living in a property only a stone's throw away from the beach, and at long last her dreams had been realised. Howie had been enrolled at a new school. He was settling down very well, claiming he'd made a new friend called Simon, who, unlike his mother, believed in his Bigfoot encounter on the beach.
"Mum, Simon's uncle once saw big footprints on the beach, and he knows they came from a Bigfoot. He took pictures of them."
"I wish, love, you wouldn't tell people what you claim to have seen on that beach," Anna reprimanded her son, unable to hide the annoyance in her voice.
"Some people, Howie, might think you're making it all up. You don't want people to think you're telling lies, do you?" "Simon didn't make any of this up,"
said Howie, thundering off in a huff. He really was quite outraged that Anna refused to believe his story, and was now doubting his new friend's claims. His mother was always so cynical about everything. Anna was particularly happy about her husband Douglas, who was like a new man, driven by purpose, excited to put his positive influences over the gardens on the property, and he had already drawn up some interesting designs that included container walls made from stone, ponds with waterfalls, hedgerows to frame flower beds, quaint stone paths, water features, and potted plant displays. These days he was whistling away happily to himself, paying her compliments all the time.
"I'm really enjoying my job here," he told her. "It's so good to feel useful again. I've got so many lovely ideas to orchestrate here for these gardens, and when I've finished with them, my boss is going to be eating out of my hands. He'll be so impressed. I have to tell you, love, Ocean Spray Manor House is exquisite. Wait until you see it. I'll take you there tomorrow. The views from those windows are absolutely spectacular. It's my job to organize a cleaning team to spruce up the place twice a week, under Mr. Fiorentino's strict instructions. It's in great nick. I understand Ocean Spray House has been in Mr. Claudio Fiorentino's wife's family line for 4 generations. And by the way, the name is definitely Fiorentino. It's not Fioretta. She doesn't want to sell this place under any circumstances. She has nostalgic, wistful memories of her childhood spent here on the beach and at the manor house. She wants to preserve the property, so that even her great-grandchildren can enjoy the benefits when they come here for their holidays.
It must have been early on a Tuesday morning that Anna saw a polished black Bentley rolling down her driveway. She was intrigued. She had a visitor, and one clearly who was not short of a bob or two. She had been told by her husband, who regularly took a walk down the beach in the late afternoon, that the old lady Verity Onassa that he'd met with his son on the first day here would soon be paying her a social visit. Could this be her now, Anna wondered. Even though she'd been busy in the cottage, she knew that enjoying some adult conversation for a change, with someone who wasn't her husband, would be gladly welcome. Anna remained at the kitchen window. She stared out curiously at the black Bentley, waiting to see the mysterious visitor as she got out of her car. She wanted to see who was paying her a visit. The door of the car swung open, and a woman with a mop of white hair in a layered, short-cropped hairstyle, wearing white pants and a silky purple blouse, climbed out of the Bentley, holding a white Maltese poodle in her arms. Anna had no idea how old the woman was. She could be in her early 70s or early 80s, but she was in robust health. She walked with a straight back and an easy grace. Anna almost jumped out of her skin when a knock sounded at the door.
"Hello, dear,"
said the woman standing in the doorway, wearing a warm, friendly smile on her face. Close up, her skin was heavily lined, but Anna thought her very beautiful, like a woman who'd lived an interesting life, and every single one of those lines told a story.
"I'm Verity Onassis. I met your husband and son on the beach on the very first day. I told him I'd be paying you a visit, so I hope you've been expecting me."
"But of course," said Anna, remembering her manners, and gesturing for the woman to enter the house.
"This here is little Bella. I usually take her with me wherever I go. She's a Maltese poodle mix. Some people have purses. I have Bella," she teased. "I promise you she's house-trained. She won't be an imposition to you. She shan't be lifting her leg on the furniture." "You are both so welcome. Please come in," said Anna, gesturing for the woman to take a seat in the living room, with its prepossessing views overlooking the ocean. "I love dogs myself. Bella is a beauty, I can see that at first glance. My son would wish to be here. He adores dogs. He's got a thing about them." "Ah, yes, I never had Bella with me when I met your son and husband on the beach the first afternoon they were here. I had dropped her off at my friend's. She's a mobile groomer. She gives Bella the works. Oh, my word, it is so cosy in here," said Verity, glancing around the living room appreciatively. "I notice you've painted your shutters lilac and the front door as well. They were like that for many years, you know, when I was a girl. My late aunt was passionate about the colour lilac. It was her quintessential favourite colour. She incorporated lilac in all her decor and in the exteriors of this house. If she was here today, she'd be as pleased as Punch to see the choice of colour you've chosen." "Well, I'm trying to make it look homely," Anna admitted. "It's a work in progress. In truth, I have no comprehension of why I painted the shutters lilac, but I guess I was divinely inspired or something. What can I get you to drink, Mrs. Onassis?" The old woman waved her hand in horror, as if she absolutely hated being called by her last name. "Oh, please call me Verity, will you, love? I tell you what, have you got something cold by any chance?
I couldn't possibly stomach anything hot in the weather like this. It's been unpalatably muggy and close, hasn't it? Do you know, when you get to my age, Anna, extremes of temperature can be such a botheration. Well, how about some ice-cold homemade lemonade, served with a plethora of ice? Asked Anna. Would that tickle your fancy, perhaps? Homemade, said Verity, raising an appreciative brow. Now that sounds idyllic. Now you're talking. I knew coming here this morning was a jolly good idea. It seems I was right, she teased. Moments later, Anna returned to the living room. She carried in her hands a tray of tall glasses that tinkled with the ice, topped up with delicious homemade lemonade, along with a plate of oatmeal and raisin cookies, and a bowl of water for little Bella. She placed the tray on the coffee table and handed the tall glass of lemonade to Verity Onassis, who took the glass gratefully from her hands. Oh, that looks lovely, dear. Just what the doctor ordered, said Verity, taking an appreciative sip. Oh, my word, that tastes so refreshing. Did you make it yourself, dear? That I did, said Anna proudly. This batch took 26 fresh lemons to make. I'm glad you like it. In truth, I'm very pleased you've come here today, Verity. It is nice to have adult female company for a change. I don't know many people in these parts, so I've been a tad lonely. Bless you, love. What a very kind thing for you to say. I understand from your husband that you're from Chicago. That's a long way from home. What brought you out here so far away from friends and family? I think we just wanted a change of scene, Anna lied. You know how it is. Not really, love. I'm one of these people who's very, very set in my ways, you see. I live in the very same house overlooking the beach where I was raised as a little girl. My father left me the house in his will. I was still living with him when he died there, so I never actually moved out. I'm the sort of person that gets very attached to things, you could say. I guess if I were a ghost, I'd come back to haunt the place, she chuckled. You know, they say that when you die, you need to release all your attachments from this earth to have a good death, like your finances, your family, your home, your possessions, and your animals. But me, I could never release my attachments to this place. So I guess I'm stuck with the fact that I'll be haunting this beach in the hereafter, she joked. I couldn't bear to live anywhere else in the world, if the truth be told. This stretch of fabulous coastline is so dear to my heart, as it was to my late aunt. I did a lot of travelling, you know, Anna, when I was a young adult. You could say I almost circumnavigated the entire globe, and I'm not exaggerating. Visited so many interesting places, historic landmarks. Saw lots of lovely sights, I did. The Great Wall of China, the pyramids in Egypt, the Taj Mahal. I've seen it all, done everything, met so many marvellous people. But you know, Anna, I was always so glad to get back home. I soon began to ask myself, what was the point of doing all this travelling, when there was only one place I really wanted to be, and that was here at home. The travel bug left me. I no longer desire to go far away. It's not because I'm getting old now and I've lost my sense of adventure, as you might think. When push comes to shove, there really is no place like home, and this stretch of coastline is my piece of heaven. And sometimes the very best adventures occur at your own front doorstep. That certainly has been my experience in this life. You've put that very eloquently, Verity. I completely get it. I do think there is a danger I might also get attached to this stretch of coastline if I'm not careful. It's so idyllic. I get why people love it here, why they never want to leave this part of the world. Well then, dear, maybe we'll both be haunting this stretch of coastline one day in the future, she chuckled.
I can't imagine wanting to leave this place, even in death."
Verity paused for a moment and sipped her lemonade.
"How is your husband enjoying his new job as caretaker at Ocean Spray?"
she asked, her tone of voice sounding a little concerned.
"Oh, you mean my husband? As it happens, he's really loving the job. He was saying to me, 'I cannot believe I've been paid for doing something I love.' So yes, he's incredibly happy here. We've come through a tumultuous time, you know. My husband been out of work, well, he has been for an entire year. He was badly injured on a construction site. It was a miracle he survived his injuries. I'll spare you the details of what actually happened to him. I don't want to be reminded of all those ugly things, but let's just say he's glad to be back on his feet again." "Goodness gracious me! You do surprise me," said Verity,
massaging Bella's white curly coat between her fingers. She looked directly at Anna with sympathetic eyes.
"I can't imagine what you've been through, love, what you've all been through. How dreadful for your poor husband. He never told me he'd been through such a tough, tortuous time. Our health is so dreadfully important to us. When it fails, it sucks the joy out of our lives like nothing else I know. I once slipped a disc in my back, you know. I couldn't leave my house for a year, so I know all about that. Your poor husband. You'd never guess, would you? He looks nimble on his feet. That was my impression when I met him on the beach that evening, or that late afternoon, if you like. Goodness gracious me, when he told me he was going to be the caretaker of Ocean Spray Estate, I thought to myself that Mr. Fiorentino had found a very strong man."
Anna nodded in agreement.
"No, you wouldn't, would you? He certainly made a very quick recovery. Oh, talking about my husband, Verity, he told me that there hasn't been a caretaker living on the grounds of the estate for a year and a half, which might explain why Ocean Spray Cottage was so neglected when we moved in. He was telling me that you were saying, Verity, that there's been a lot of caretakers here over the years, that suddenly just upped and left this place. That got me rather intrigued, I have to say. I thought I needed to talk to you about it. I have to admit it was a little troubling to hear that, but I was hoping that you might be able to throw some light over this mystery." "It's been all very unfortunate," agreed Verity. "I know Mr. Fiorentina hired a local man to manage the affairs of the estate, who lived very close to town, but he gave in his notice a week ago. He's moving to Utah, I believe, to be close to his wife's family. It's the reason why Mr. Fiorentina was eager to replace him with a new live-in caretaker. In recent years, most people who move here don't last very long at Ocean Spray Cottage. One couple did happen to live here for a couple of years, very happily. But the last caretaker and his wife left Ocean Spray Cottage in the middle of the night, just like that. They gave in their notice the very next day to Mr. Fiorentino. I hasten to say they were incredibly rude to the poor man. They said to him they wouldn't be seen dead staying in Ocean Spray Cottage again, and he could stuff his job and put it up his backside. Mr. Fiorentino asked them why they were so grievously upset, and they told him that he knew exactly why they were pissed, and that he needed to rot in hell. I never did like that couple, I have to say. The last caretaker was very shifty, you know, very furtive eyes, I thought. He looked as if he was up to all kinds of nonsense. So when I heard he was gone, I have to say I was heartily relieved about that. I did come to visit them when they moved in, you know. They practically threw me out of Ocean Spray Cottage. The caretaker's wife told me she didn't appreciate visits from strangers without advance notice. And did I mind awfully if I bogged off? Those were the exact words she used on me. I was quite affronted. I couldn't believe Mr. Fiorentina, who is a very meticulous man, about everything he does, would hire two such disagreeable people.
We are friendly folk around here in these parts, so that woman's abrupt manner was most uncouth."
Anna whistled.
"She sounds absolutely awful. That is blatantly rude. It's unfortunate, though, that so many caretakers left. Do you think they didn't like working for Claudia Fiorentino? My husband reckons he might be quite the taskmaster. I mean, he practically insisted we left Chicago right away that very night, when my husband received the job."
"Well, that doesn't surprise me,"
laughed Verity.
"Have you ever met Mr. Fiorentino? Let's just say he's very particular." "No, I haven't," said Anna. "My husband got his job online. He never met the man."
Verity raised an arched brow.
"They do rarely do things differently nowadays, don't they? All this computer technology, it's beyond me. I could never get into it myself. I prefer to do things the old-fashioned way. I have a cell phone, you know, but I barely use it at all, apart from making essential calls to my family and friends. I won't have my life dictated to by a silly little gadget. Mr. Fiorentino may be many things, but underneath it all he's a very good man, you know. I've met him myself, and yes, I will say he has exacting standards, and is demanding, but I can assure you he's a decent man. He pays generously. He's always very fair to his staff." "So then if it's not Mr. Fiorentino driving these caretakers away from Ocean Spray Cottage, what is it then that makes them abandon this place?" "You really want to know the answer to your question?" asked Verity. "I'm not sure you're going to believe me, but I'll tell you anyway. I was talking about attachments earlier on, love, and how if I was deceased I'd probably come back to haunt the stretch of coastline myself, as I love it so much. And I didn't actually say that in jest, you know. I meant every word of it. So I have a theory about what I believe is going on here at Ocean Spray Cottage. I'm pretty sure I'm right, and it's got a lot to do with attachment." "Go on," said Anna. "You've got me intrigued." "Well, I happen to know a lot about the subject of attachments. When I was a little girl of about 7 or 8 years old, my father regularly took me to a little antique shop in town. A lovely little shop it was. It was called the Old Soul. You don't get shops like that any more these days. More's the pity, if you ask me. Now, my father was a passionate collector of antiques. He loved all things old, with a historic significance attached to it. The antique dealer was a very good friend of my father's. This was a long time ago in 1943. I remember his name was Mr. Stanley Rockenster. The man wore an old-fashioned top hat and tails every day of the week, as if he was stuck in an 1800s time warp. He was such a debonair, rather dashing gentleman, you know. He wore a distinctive pocket watch in his top pocket. I always remember he had these little round spectacles, and a distinguished little moustache that curled neatly at the ends. It's funny the things you remember, isn't it? Anyway, he gestured to my father to come and see this new rocking chair that had come into the shop. He knew my father had been looking to acquire a rocking chair, and this one was spectacularly unique, handcrafted in walnut. It was a head-turner. "I think I've got the perfect chair you're looking for, sir," he told my father. My father took one look at that rocking chair and said, "It's a magnificent piece. I'll take it." Well, we brought the rocking chair into our home, placed it in our living room, in a very special place, and on several occasions when we were entertaining our guests, many of our visitors were eager to sit in that chair, but when they did, they were physically thrown off it. My parents observed the whole thing.
These guests of my parents would claim that someone had physically thrown them off the chair. They had felt a hand on their backs, pushing them off the seat. It really startled them. My mother sat on that rocking chair herself, and the very same thing happened to her. So she was spooked by the whole thing. She wanted that rocking chair out of our house. She put it on the street corner to dispose of it, in the hope that someone would pick it up and just take it away. But when she returned to the living room, the rocking chair had been replaced in its original position. She was so freaked out by that event, because she knew she had put that chair on the street corner. So how had it miraculously reappeared into the house like that? She left that rocking chair well alone, deciding she wanted nothing more to do with it. My father was naturally perturbed by what was happening with the rocking chair, as when he sat on it himself, nothing bad ever happened to him. He loved that rocking chair, but he couldn't fathom why certain people were always thrown off it. The next time me and my father visited the old antique shop, he told Mr. Rockenster about the enigmatic, rather cryptic events concerning the rocking chair. How my mother had been unable to dispose of it. It had miraculously reappeared in our living room. The first thing Mr. Rockenster said to my father is, "Ah, you've got an attachment, sir. It happens a lot with antiques, you know. This is nothing new. I've experienced it quite a lot in my profession, especially with things from the World War." My father was rather perplexed. He said to Mr. Rockenster, "But I don't understand. What is an attachment?" Mr. Rockenster told him the rocking chair had come from a deceased estate. It had belonged to a man called George Farrington, who would sit on his front porch every afternoon and evening, watching the world go by. But George Farrington was a very particular, dogmatic man, with strong likes and dislikes. He was very opinionated about things, definitely a misogynist. He had no time for women at all. He was quite haughty and prideful, with a little bit of superiority, rather snobbish, you could say. He didn't like people who weren't as refined and polished as he was. Mr. Rockenster told my father that he believed Mr. George Farrington was still attached to that chair, even after death, and that was why he threw anyone off it that he disliked or felt wasn't good enough for the chair. For some reason, my father was a very polished, well-to-do gentleman. So I expect Mr. George Farrington was happy for him to use his rocking chair. Believe it or not, the rocking chair is still in my home to this very day, and sometimes I observe it rocking on its own accord, for no rhyme or reason. But I've got used to it, you know. I'll never let anyone sit on that chair, unless they're incredibly posh, because otherwise George Farrington will throw them off the chair in a heartbeat. I promise you, nothing has changed in that regard. Believe it or not, when I was 8 years old, I would come and stay with Aunt Victoria rather regularly. My parents had itchy feet. They just seemed to want to travel so much. So I was left in her charge a great deal. And I think she enjoyed my company. She'd put me to sleep in the upstairs bedroom at night, read me a story. One night I stood up on my bed to look outside the window. I'd heard an owl hooting, and I loved owls. This owl was so close that I almost believed it was sitting on my mantel hooting. That's how close it sounded. So I pulled open the window and stood up on my bed to peer out, hoping I'd maybe spot this owl somewhere. There was a tree very close to the window, so I was looking out on the branches there to see if I could see anything. It was a moonlit night.
and so the visibility was excellent. My aunt was out there in the front yard, having a conversation with a huge hairy man. I remember thinking he was like a giant. He was so very big. I'd never seen anyone like him before. He had these enormous shoulders, overlong arms, and an arched head. The hairy man gave her a couple of very large fish, and then she gave him something in return. I suspected it probably was some of her cookies. She was very good at cooking, you know. But anyway, my aunt was very friendly with this idiosyncratic hairy man. Whenever I went to stay with her, the hairy man visited my aunt regularly. I began to call him the Bear Man. He was so hairy and so large, it seemed like the most appropriate name. I was at that kind of age that if I saw Father Christmas climbing down the chimney, or Hermit the Frog visiting my home, it would be very normal for me. Kids are so accepting of the unusual, are they not? I asked my aunt who the Bear Man was, and she told me he was a very good friend of hers, but was very, very shy and bashful, and I mustn't tell anybody about him, as he was a secret, and I never did, you know. It was only when I was older, and long after my Aunt Victoria had died, that I realized the Bear Man was in fact a very large male Bigfoot.
A Bigfoot? Are you joking? No, I'm not joking, Anna dear. Goodness gracious me, look at your face. You look so confounded. I happen to know there are 2 Bigfoots in these parts, a male and a female. How do I know this? Because I've seen them very often in the early evenings taking a stroll down this stretch of beach over here. They show themselves to me. They're terribly friendly, always nodding, very politely at me. I think they know I'm related to my late Aunt Victoria Seymour. That's why they show themselves to me. The one thing my great-aunt always used to tell me when I was a little girl, that the Bear Man was a very loyal friend, that you couldn't get anyone as loyal as him. She would say that normal human beings have issues and agendas, but with the Bear Man what you see is what you get.
Oh, my word, said Anna. I gave my son such a chastising the other day. He claimed he'd seen a Bigfoot on the beach, and that the Bigfoot talked to him. And I just didn't believe a word of it. I thought he was making up fictitious stories. It seems I've got some apologizing to do. How very interesting, Anna dear. I can assure you, the very fact that your son encountered a Bigfoot on the beach was not a random accident by any stretch of the imagination. In my experience, these elusive cryptid creatures don't just show themselves to anyone. What did they say to your son? Or was it one Bigfoot that spoke to him? I'm amazed they engaged in conversation with him. Your son must be very special. Dear me, what did they say? Let me think. Oh, my son told me they had a message from some old lady who said that they were welcome, that we were welcome to stay at Ocean Spray Cottage. He said that the old lady was very particular and had got him to scare away anyone he didn't like from the cottage. But she told us we were welcome to stay here. I thought my son was making this all up, I hasten to say. Verity clapped her hands enthusiastically. Oh, my word, that is such good news. Don't you see, that proves my theory about attachment is startlingly correct. It's a very similar story to the rocking chair in my home. When Victoria Seymour died, she was incredibly attached to Ocean Spray Cottage and, of course, the coastline in these parts. I think the Bigfoot she befriended and his progeny have been very loyal to Aunt Victoria even in death. They've been keeping a careful, vigilant eye on the cottage for her.
They have a very obvious connection to the other side, you know, Anna. They're clairvoyant and can see and hear spirit. They're also telepathic. My aunt told me this. I think if the spirit of Victoria Seymour doesn't like the people that have moved into Ocean Spray Cottage, which she still obviously considers to be her own, even in death, she gets those Bigfoots to scare away the people from the property. One family stayed here for 2 years. They were very happy. She obviously liked them. They were called the Olivers. But they couldn't stay here indefinitely, as Mr. Oliver was given a really incredible job in Connecticut that he just couldn't turn down. I think they lived in the cottage very peacefully. My Aunt Victoria liked them, I suspect. But when they left, all hell broke loose, as the new caretakers would leave in a panic. Something scared them away. It was those 2 mischievous Bigfoots. Believe me, I know. So what does this mean exactly, Verity? Well, it sounds like you and your family have got absolutely nothing to worry about, which is very good news as far as I'm concerned. My guess is the Bigfoot spoke to your son to tell you and your family not to worry, because you were welcome to stay in the cottage. He was conveying a message from beyond the grave, from my Aunt Victoria. I know it sounds rather fanciful, very woo-woo and far-fetched, but I believe that that is what is going on here, and it's excellent news as far as you're concerned. It means your family will not be bothered by those Bigfoots, who in their loyalty to my great-aunt Victoria have been turfing out people from this place when she doesn't want them staying here. I imagine they must be jolly good at doing it. I mean, let's not kid. Who wouldn't be terrified and scared of an intimidating Bigfoot that appears to be threatening you? No wonder all those people left in an awful hurry. So what actually did happen to these caretakers living here at Ocean Spray Cottage? So how exactly did the Bigfoot scare away the caretakers from Ocean Spray Cottage, Verity? Do you happen to know the answer to that question? Well, I do, in a manner of speaking. I spoke to Mr. Fiorentino himself. He told me that many of the caretakers staying at Ocean Spray Cottage reported the feeling of being very unwelcome there, as if something didn't want them living in the cottage. And then 1 or 2 of them reported seeing an old woman in their dreams, telling them to get the hell out of her place. I personally believe that that was my Aunt Victoria Seymour, reaching them through their dreams. It was at night that these caretakers would report very strange, enigmatic banging on the walls of the cottage. They also saw ambiguous, shadowy faces staring at them through the windows with yellow eyes, and I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been. Mr. Fiorentino didn't believe a word of it, of course. But I suspect if you were staying in the cottage at night and you saw Bigfoot circumnavigating your property, banging on the walls with the sole purpose of intimidating you and scaring you half to death, they would more than likely achieve their goals.
Anna had to admit, feeling heartily relieved, that the Bigfoot that had encountered her son by the rock pool on the beach had assured him that their family was welcome to stay at Ocean Spray Cottage. She knew she had some apologizing to do to her son, because she had disbelieved everything he'd told her. She had some making up to do.
Well, I better be going,
said Verity Onassis, rising to her feet.
I've really enjoyed our little chat, Anna. It's been so good to meet you, my dear. And by the sounds of things, you and your family are going to be around for a very long time, now that you've won Victoria Seymour's seal of approval. And with those lilac shutters, my guess is you've pleased her greatly. My aunt always had impeccable taste when it comes to people. I knew the moment I laid eyes on your husband on the beach that I liked him. And now that I've met you, I like you too, Anna. And I'm very sure we're going to become great friends.
I would like that very much, said Anna.
Reuben's account. I share a flat with my older brother in Chicago, even though I never liked who he had become in recent years. When I was growing up, my older brother could do no wrong in my eyes. I viewed him as some kind of superhero, but that all changed exponentially when he started to deal with drugs. It was when I saw him beating up someone really badly, because they failed to pay him on time for the drugs they had acquired from him, that it occurred to me that my brother was not a good man. That came as a dreadful blow. It was like putting someone on a pedestal all of your life. You think that they are close to perfect, and then you realize they're anything but. That discovery can be mortifying. I know it was for me. I was amazed that the man my brother had beaten up actually got up and managed to hobble away. I couldn't believe he was still alive after such a beating. I want the money by next week, my brother called out to him. Or next time you're dead. Do you understand that? The man looked at my brother in a dazed terror, and I was revulsed by my brother's barbaric behaviour towards him. My brother turned around to look directly at me, and he said, "See how it's done, bro? This is how you make people respect you. No one will ever get away with not paying me what I'm owed. That man is very lucky to be alive. I went easy on him, but I do what I do, bro, to make everyone see that when I'm owed payment, I expect it on time, or something very bad will happen to them." In that poignant, revelatory moment, I knew without a shadow of a doubt what my brother was potentially capable of, and I thought it more than likely that he may have killed and got away with it. But I have no way of knowing whether I'm right or not about this. Of course, the police have sniffed around him often enough, asking questions, but they have nothing on him, as my brother has always been conniving, cunning, and very clever, so he's never been arrested. My brother's apartment had been raided for drugs by police before, but I think he had an informant on the inside, so he never got caught in the possession of drugs, and yet I have seen his bedroom look like a pharmacy, so he was a big dealer, and very well known in these parts. The only reason I chose to live with someone as disagreeable as my brother is because I was made redundant from my last job, and so in my jobless state, I wasn't able to financially continue living in my old apartment, so I had to rely on my brother's hospitality. My mother lived with my stepfather, whom I never liked, so living with her was not even a viable option, even though I did consider it. I am lucky my brother has always been good to me, so it was a no-brainer that I would move in with him for as long as I liked. My brother had treated me very well all my life. He slapped me on the back and told me that he would always look out for his little brother, and I knew he meant that. "Bro, why don't you move in here with me?" he encouraged. "If you need any dough, you only have to ask." My brother may have been an artfully Machiavellian dealer, but never once did he ever take drugs himself, which is incredibly unusual, and he certainly wouldn't have allowed me to experiment with the stuff either. "Drugs scramble your brain, bro. They screw you up," he would say, and yet despite knowing all this, my brother was extremely happy to sell the drugs without a conscience to all his customers, knowing full well what drugs do to people. He was ruthless in his dealing, and had earned a formidable reputation on the streets of Chicago. His street name was the Rottweiler, which was apt, as he'd eat you up alive for breakfast if you dared to cross him in any way, and people were naturally terrified of him. I was lying on my bed in my bedroom when I heard my brother on the phone. I noticed he sounded a bit irked, So I eavesdropped on his conversation. You've got to be kidding. He's only gone to the Oregon coast, has he? Bloody cheek. I think he's running scared, isn't he? He knows we've been watching him. I will pay him a visit myself. Let him know what's what, so he keeps that mouth of his sealed. We may be far away from him in terms of location, but he needs to know I'm still watching him. If he talks to anyone, he's a goner, and I'll make sure he understands that. I'll be the one to put a bullet in his head myself, if I hear a word out of him. He told me he hasn't even told his wife about what I did to him, but I can't trust him. I still don't get how he didn't die that day, but I think a word with him should keep him in check. That man's a pussycat. He needs to know that the Rottweiler is breathing down his neck. Nothing has changed in that regard. Moments later, my brother came into my bedroom. He told me, "Get packed. We're going to the Oregon coast. It's a 29-hour drive from here. You're coming with me. We'll go in my Jeep." "Can't someone else go with you?" I asked him obsequiously. I really couldn't face spending 29 hours trapped in a car. I was predisposed to getting car sick. My brother looked at me thoughtfully, and then grinned. "No problems, bro. I tell you what we'll do. We'll fly there, and then we'll hire a car when we get to the Oregon coast." He clapped his hands. "Go on, it'll be fun. Let's do it, shall we, Rube?" I knew I couldn't exactly wiggle out of going with my brother on this trip, as he'd done so much for me, and all he required of me was my company. He'd never tried to rope me in getting involved with his drugs, and so what harm would it do just to fly with him to Oregon? "What's going on?" I asked him. "Why do you want me to come to Oregon with you? I heard you on your cell phone talking about letting some man know you're still breathing down his neck, lest he should talk about you. You're not going to do something stupid, are you, bro?" "Of course I'm not going to do anything stupid. What do you take me for, bro?" "I am after someone, as it happens. His name is Douglas Finnegan. He was a customer of mine for a very long time, until he wasn't. He bought heavy-duty stuff from me, due to the excruciating back pain he'd been experiencing since he was a kid. And he found what I gave him relieved his pain exponentially, like nothing else he'd ever tried. He became addicted to what I gave him. He wanted more and more of the stuff. He complained bitterly when I stepped up the price. But I'm a businessman. That's what you do. He started owing me money big time. Douglas would give his wife a check for household expenses every month, because she managed the finances for the family. He was worried that his wife, a woman called Anna, was going to notice how much money was going missing from their account every month. He didn't want her to grow suspicious of him. She would be mortified, he said, if she knew about his drug habit. I told him I didn't care about all that. He needed to pay his outstanding debts in a week's time, or there would be big recriminations. He knew I meant business. He told me that he needed a few more days to acquire the funds, but I knew he was toying with me. I'd seen it all before. Me and 2 other men I roped in to help me waited behind a bush near his car when he was leaving the building site where he worked. We pounced on him. In truth, we thought we had left him for dead, but he made an astonishing recovery. I visited him in the hospital myself, posing as a relative of the family's. I brought with me a big bouquet of flowers. I warned him that if he dared tell the police that I was responsible for beating him up, that he was a dead man. I told him I'd give orders for members of his own family to be harmed and killed. I told him he had a kid called Howie, and that I was watching his child. We wouldn't want anything bad to happen to little Howie, would we, Douglas? I could tell he was scared. When you start threatening your customer's family, you literally have them eating out of your hand. They know that if they tell the police, that it will backfire on them. I got one of my boys to hand-deliver notes in the post, warning him to keep quiet. I've had my people following his family around very carefully. One of my informers found out he only upped and left his wife's family home in the middle of the night over a week ago. He's got a job as a caretaker at a place on the Oregon coast, a cottage known as Ocean Spray, where he's taking care of the estate of a man called Claudia Fiorentino. So if you must know, that's why I'm going to the coast. I need to see him in person, to establish some ground rules with him. If he messes me around, he's as good as dead. But why? I don't understand, I asked my brother. Why do you need to pay this man a visit? Is it really necessary? I'm sure you've got nothing to worry about. I'm sure he's scared of you. That's why I suspect he went to the Oregon coast in the first place, to escape Chicago and escape you. Why don't you leave him the hell alone? I'm watching my back, bro, that's why. Douglas Finnegan is lucky to be alive, let me tell you. If he thinks he can run away from my beady eyes, he's got another thing coming. I want him to know that if he dares blab to anyone about me, I will harm him and kill him if need be. And I have associates that will harm him on my behalf. If I get locked up or thrown into prison, I need to make my position very clear with him. He needs to know that I'm watching him all the time, but there is no escape for the wicked. I know exactly where he is. He'll never be able to breathe easily at night, because I'm watching him. Look, bro, I said, I think you're overreacting. This man is not going to blab to the police. If I was wearing his shoes, I wouldn't. He's already running scared. If he was going to say something, he would have already told the police everything they wanted to know. But he hasn't, has he? I don't think he will say anything after all this time. Think about it. If you fail to report a crime for months on end, a robbery perhaps, or something like that, well, it's going to look profoundly strange if you suddenly file a police report. I'm sure going all the way to the Oregon coast to relay your message is a little bit dramatic and a waste of time. Bro, said my brother, slapping me on the back affectionately. I'm not called the Rottweiler for nothing, you know. I do what I do to establish a reputation for myself, a formidable reputation, to create boundaries that cannot be crossed, or else people will think they can mess with me. If they see any chinks in my armor, they would take advantage, and I can't have that under any circumstances. Don't you feel bad, bro, that you nearly killed this poor man? I asked my brother. You forget I've seen you beat someone up before, and it was brutal. Why don't you leave this Douglas fellow alone? Because I cannot, bro. I don't expect you to understand. The drug business is a tough game, you know. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. If you're afraid to fight, you don't get involved in this business, or you'll be bitten. So what's your plan, then, when you get to the Oregon coast, I mean? Are you just going to knock on the door and say hi there, just so that you know I'm still watching you? No, I'm not going to do that, bro. I'm going to find out exactly where on the Oregon coast Ocean Spray Cottage is. And when we've done our homework, we are going to give Douglas Finnegan the surprise of his life. One he is never going to forget. We will knock on his front door at the dead of night, when he's nicely tucked away in bed, and we'll pay him a midnight call that he's not expecting. I need my customers to always remain unsettled, taken off guard, so receiving a fortuitous visit from me, when he's not anticipating a visit of any kind, will leave his feathers ruffled, so that he'll never ever forget that I'm watching him. Bloody hell, bro. Isn't that rather creepy? Paying him a visit at the dead of night? That is freaky. You're going to get them out of their beds, the whole Finnegan family, and scare the bejesus out of them. I hardly think that is fair. You get the idea, bro, said my brother. That's how I like to do business. Scare the hell out of my customers, so they know who's boss, who's calling the shots. The good news, bro, is you're coming along with me for the ride. No, I'm not, bro, I said, shaking my head vigorously and holding my hand up to steady my brother's idea, to hold it back in some way before it blossomed any further. I wanted no part of scaring an innocent American family half to death. I was against my brother doing something like this in the very first place. I tell you what, I told him, I'll come along with you on that flight, but I am not going to come with you and knock on somebody's door at the dead of night while you issue your idle threats to Douglas Finnegan. I just can't do that. I don't like what you do, bro, and I never have. I want no part of your drug business. Who said anything about you getting involved with drugs, Reuben? You're overreacting, bro, like you always do. You would be useless in the drug business. You're far too soft anyway. We're simply going to let Douglas Finnegan know that he can never get too comfortable living out there on the Oregon coast, because I'm still watching him. You will come with me, Reuben. I must insist, and I won't take no for an answer. I've done a hell of a lot for you over the years, and the least you can do is accompany me on this trip. You don't even have to come to the front door with me when I wake the Finnegan family up in the middle of the night. But I want you waiting for me in the wings, if you get my drift, and I don't think that's asking too much. The cadence of my brother's voice was both stern and intimidating. I knew I had no place to argue with him. It was true. He'd generously given me money when I needed it, shelter and food. So I knew I was caught between a rock and a hard place. So I reluctantly agreed to accompany him on this crazy mission, even though I wanted no part of this. How I wished I had not been made redundant from my job, because then I wouldn't be in such a financial pickle, and I could have avoided becoming ensnared in this horrible mess. It was crazy that Douglas Finnegan, who could not really be called a customer by rights anymore, was in the spotlight of my brother's concerns. I guess he was covering his back, ensuring that Douglas Finnegan never ever blabbed to the police on him. 2 nights later, it's very dark. Me and my brother are on the beach. It's a cool night, with a gentle breeze whipping against our skins. I feel far from happy about this mission. I know that we have to access a flight of steps up a hilly incline to reach Ocean Spray Cottage that overlooks the coastline. It's an enviable place to live, with what I imagine during the day must be idyllic views over the ocean. I wouldn't mind getting away from Chicago to live in a place like this. My heart is throbbing violently in my chest as I try to put myself in the Finnegan shoes when my brother begins banging on their front door in the middle of the night. I couldn't help thinking my brother had picked up this insane idea from all the horror movies we'd watched together over the years as children. This night would be like something out of Fright Night for the poor Finnegan family, and I could only feel sympathy for them. I clandestinely despised myself for not having the courage to stand up to my brother. But the truth was that even though he always looked out for me, I was extremely intimidated by him. And underneath all the layers, I'd always been a wee bit scared of him
something I was loath to admit. It would have been beautiful walking across the beach, had the circumstances been different, with the gossamer moonlight spilling generously on the surface of the ocean in a shimmering pearly glaze. The moon was happily nestled in the dark sky, like a big round white disk, and so the magnanimous light it offered us afforded us excellent visibility. I got the profound sense that someone was watching us, and this very disquieting feeling filtered through my clothes with an iciness that goes beyond the icy weather. I don't feel good about this, bro, I told him nervously, my eyes scanning the beach for any sign of obvious movement. I was certain we were being watched, but nothing was there, apart from a few crabs scurrying across the beach. I think we should go back to the car, I told my brother in earnest. Something is watching us. Oh, Reuben, said my brother, letting out a mock laugh. You are squeamish, aren't you? You're scared of everything. You were like that as a little boy, afraid of your own shadow. And now you're a man and you're still scared. Shame on you. You need to grow up, bro. I assure you there is nothing to fear. This will be over soon. I winced under the condescending blows from my brother, but I knew better than to take offence. But all the same, I was certain I was not mistaken, that we were being watched. I wasn't wrong, because I saw her. The woman was walking across the beach, pointing to us accusingly, as if she knew exactly what my brother intended to do. There was something airily strange and creepy about this woman. She looked real, but at the same time she did not. There was an airy luminescence around her when she walked towards us, and then I noticed she appeared to be floating, and that was when I observed the woman had no feet, nor shoes, and my blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, but no words seeped from my throat. I was frozen in terror. I felt like I'd become a character in a horror movie and stepped off the pages of a book straight into a story, of which I wanted to play no part. But I had been flung onto the pages, kicking and screaming. I realized in that moment I was obviously seeing a ghost. My brother did too. He was freaking out. I have never seen him afraid of anything before. But when he realized the woman had no feet, his eyes grew as round as saucers, and his mouth dropped wide open. I suspected he was disabled from being able to scream, but even his frantic cries would have been drowned out by the obstreperous crashing sounds of the waves. My legs crumbled beneath me. I willed this apparition to go away. She glared at me furiously. Seconds later, something more incredulous happened. A huge, big black mass began gallivanting towards us, moving like the wind, letting out an enormous shriek that was so terrifying I thought I was going to spontaneously combust. I was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread as my life flashed before me. The billowing black mass spiraled towards us like a dense, foggy smoke. As the fog got closer to us, I realized it was distinctly humanoid in shape, and then the spillage of the ethereal moonlight breathed its revelatory light over everything, and I realized this enigmatic, misty black spectre was an indignant Bigfoot. He moved towards us, swinging his arms backwards and forwards furiously. And if I thought the ghostly woman was threatening, this creature was 1,000 times worse. The Bigfoot was 9 foot tall, with a distinctive pyramid-shaped head, ponderous shoulders, and long flowing dark hair. I heard a screaming, deep guttural voice ringing in my head saying, "Get out of here!"
Don't you ever come back, or I will kill the both of you. Leave these people alone. Why do you want to threaten them? I do not welcome dark energy in this place." The apparition of the woman continued to point at us accusingly, and then she vanished before my eyes. My heart thundered in my chest. Panic overcame me. The Bigfoot gave us chase. My brother was screaming, "Run, Roo! Run! This thing is going to kill us!" I'm glad to say, after a vacillating hesitancy, like a stalling car engine that refuses to start, eventually my adrenaline kicked in, and I began to run across that beach, faster than I've ever run before or since. But I knew I was no match for this Bigfoot. I tried to run towards my brother's car that was parked in a parking bay near the beach, but I never reached it in time, as the Bigfoot was so close behind me. My heart dipped in terror as I felt his vaporous breath on my neck. Oh my God, he was going to get me! He was going to kill me! He was too close for comfort! I was certain that I was a dead man. But the Bigfoot brushed right past me, and then he began to give my brother chase. He threw my brother onto the beach sand. My brother began to scream out, "Help me, Reuben! Do something! Help!" But what could I do? I slowed down to a walking pace and just simply stared. The Bigfoot did not seem interested in harming me, but his hostile intentions were focused on my brother. His eyes seemed to breathe out fire as he glowered down at my brother. "Please don't hurt him," I begged the Bigfoot. "Please don't hurt him." The Bigfoot was staring down at my brother defiantly, and then he turned around and glided away down the beach sand and was gone from our sight, leaving me and my brother staring at each other in bewilderment. We were amazed that we were still alive and that the Bigfoot had gone. "Bloody hell! That Bigfoot spoke to me," said my brother. "I'm not making this up, Reuben. He spoke to me. Can you believe that? He told me if I ever came back to this beach again, he would kill me. We need to get the hell out of here now. There's something weird going on in this beach, and I want no part of it." It was 2 days after this strange event that my brother was arrested by the police. DNA evidence was recovered on a deceased corpse of one of his customers who had failed to pay him on time. My brother was accused of this man's murder. He was locked away for life. I am in no doubt he did what he was accused of. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother, but I don't like the bad choices he has made in his life and the evil things he's done. So he deserved to spend the rest of his life locked up in a prison cell. He is reaping what he sowed. If you're evil, your wickedness will come back to bite you, as it has done so for my brother. I have always warned him that the road he was travelling down would lead to imminent disaster, but he failed to listen, and now he regrets the choices he has made. He even wrote to Mr. Finnegan, would you believe it, to apologise for beating him up. I think he regrets some of the life choices he made. He had a degree as an accountant, and he thought selling drugs would be an easy way to get rich quick. It turned out it was the worst decision of his life. After my brother was incarcerated, I informed the Finnegan family at Ocean Spray Cottage about everything that had transpired on the beach that night, as I wanted answers. And I told them about my brother's insidious intention to scare them half to death. But I told them they need not look over their shoulders any more. My brother was now safely locked away in a prison cell for good. Anna Finnegan told me the ghost I saw was a woman called Mrs. Seymour, who was protecting Ocean Spray Cottage, as she had a physical attachment to the place, even in death. I was told that in life she enjoyed a relationship with a Bigfoot, and the descendants of her Bigfoot friend were now watching over Ocean Spray Cottage on her behalf. I realized in that moment that this world is a hell of a lot more extraordinary than we give it credit for, and that the spirit world knows exactly what we're doing. I know the ghost of Mrs. Seymour knew what my brother's intentions were that night, as did the Bigfoot. There are some things we cannot hide from those that we cannot see, and that Bigfoot was determined to scare us away. Mrs. Finnegan was shocked to learn that her husband had been in insufferable back pain for many years, which was why he'd been buying drugs on the sly from my brother. Mr. Finnegan said that after he was beaten up within an inch of his life, he made a full recovery, and his back pain mysteriously vanished. The Finnegans still live at Ocean Spray Cottage. They love their new lives by the coast. But it is only their son Howie that ever catches a sighting of his two Bigfoot friends. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.